Welcome to the Morgan County Planning Commission meeting. Today is Thursday, August 14th, 2025. It's 5 o'clock. We are going to start with a prayer, and then, or do we want to, still want to start with a prayer and Pledge of Allegiance and then do our work session or our training? Okay. We will start with a prayer. Member McMillan, would you like to pray?
Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for all the blessings Thou hast given us. We're grateful we have the opportunity to meet together here as a County Planning Commission. We're grateful for all that we've been blessed with, and we ask You to have the Spirit to be with us, to help us to lead and guide us as we discuss these different items on the agenda today, and bless us with Thy Spirit and help us to have patience and work together. And we say these things humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Motion by Member Sessions, second by Member King. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Any declaration of conflicts of interest? Seeing none, we'll move into public comment. We will have a public hearing tonight for the legislative item on the schedule. If there's anything else you'd like to speak to us about, now is the time. If you come up to the microphone, please state your name for the record. So, do you want to come forward, maybe, or? Go ahead.
I didn't know about this meeting until about 20 minutes ago. So why weren't we notified, people that live up there?
So the public comment, you can make comment. It isn't a time for question and answers. The members may answer later, but you can certainly voice your concerns and someone will speak with you and address it.
Years ago, we were told that as long as it wasn't a two-way road, one in and one out, there'd be no one building. Since then, I think 3 homes have gone in.
If you would like to give comment during the public hearing, I think we will have quite a bit of discussion tonight around this item. Thank you. Seeing no additional comments, we will move into our Planning Commission training tonight before our legislative item with Craig Call. That's your cue, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be in Morgan again. It's been my pleasure to have a long and positive association with those who hold both elected and appointed office here. I first was involved about 28 years ago when I was appointed to be the first property rights ombudsman for the state. And that's when I got acquainted with good people who work with a lot of different government entities around the state, including Morgan. So my understanding is that you wanted to have this conversation about land use law, and Madam Chair, do you have a sense of how long you want this to take as commissioners?
Yeah.
Okay, happy to do that. Just want the public that are here to go ahead and grab a pillow. Okay. I appreciate that concern. I think I'm good to stand for an hour and a half, but you can tell by my advanced age that may be in your favor. That if I don't sit down, it might be timely. All right, so let me introduce myself just a little more. I am an attorney. I had the privilege of serving 10 years as the property rights ombudsman. I have a checkered past. We might as well get to it now. I served on a city council. And I also served in the state legislature, so there it is. I'm glad you didn't hear that on some street corner. I also had the opportunity to write this book, which is available for elected and appointed officials through the Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman. It covers basic ideas of land use law, and I have more copies here tonight for those who don't have a copy. We've certainly done our best to get them to elected and appointed officials, but when I'm through, we just need to find out how many we might need from those who don't have one, and then I'm happy to grab them and make sure everybody has what they need. I do need to thank the Property Rights Ombudsman's Office. They have a fund that is generated by a 1% fee on building permits throughout the state. And that fund is used to provide training opportunities, and they are covering the modest tab for me to drive in from Plain City and visit with you tonight. So thanks to them. So I just generally want to talk. Well, as I understand it, everybody on the Planning Commission doesn't have the same amount of experience. Some of you may have been recently appointed. And so let's talk just generally about the concepts that we're involved with here. The main point to make, and again, as you could tell from this handout that was provided, I could go on for a very long time showing all these slides and doing all these comments, but I certainly won't do that. But let's talk about this generally, big picture. The county and the city are creatures of the state legislature. In our American system of government, the states or the colonies were here first. So they delegated certain powers to the federal government, and they also have created the opportunity for political subdivisions, and that includes counties, cities, government or special service districts, mosquito abatement districts, universities, school boards, all of those things. So we operate in local government with the structure that the state legislature has set. That said, there is a lot of discretion in what local government officials can do. And there are two main functions. One of them is to create the rules that have to do with the use of land. Generally, that's a legislative function and done by the elected officials with the advice of the Planning Commission. So in Utah, the only way to get a land use law passed is for the Planning Commission to review the concept, come up with a specific proposal, make a recommendation to the elected officials, the county commission, and then have the county commission review it and adopt it with amendment or without. There simply is no other way to create a land use law. The county commission cannot do it without the planning commission's advice. Once the law is created, then there's another entirely different function in land use law that in each county, depending on the elected officials and how they set it up, can be performed by the planning commission and perhaps by the county commission. And that's the administrative side. So on the legislative side, we create the law. On the administrative side, that's the word, we administer it. We apply it to get to specific applications. So the limits on creating the law are shown here on the screen. Obviously, we have the Bill of Rights, the American Constitution, as well as the Utah Constitution. The federal statutes, which don't get involved too much, but in certain areas they certainly have a lot of influence. The state statutes, which can be quite intrusive, particularly if you hear the opinions over at the League of Cities and Towns meetings. The case law, the judges decide how we're going to interpret and apply the law. We also have the local ordinances, which means when we're in the application process of administering, we have to follow those ordinances. And then the codes and regulations, the building code, the fire code, the health code. So I didn't mean to gloss over the idea that this is easy, because it's complicated enough that luckily, and I know you all share this relief and pleasure knowing that lawyers are essential and that paying lawyers is essential. It's just something we have to do. And so I know you'll share my joy in that experience. So first of all, the question then is creating the law. Basically, in the business we're in now, there's always been elected officials who create the law, and there's always been property owners who are subject to it. In larger jurisdictions, certainly as this one, there are professionals that help provide interpretation and assistance. They facilitate. There's also, of course, the neighbors and the third parties. And we know from recent events in Morgan County, as well as in other places, that often they play a very significant role in how the application process moves forward. So this idea that there's going to be three different corners of the conversation in many cases, and the planners who are to provide some perspective and help balance and coach and maybe even referee, the law has evolved in part because over the last decades, the third parties, the neighbors, and the public have become much more involved than it used to be. Back when I was a kid, back when, well, Peter Skeen Ogden and I came through here in the 1800s. But there were property owners, of course, making applications, and there were city and county officials reviewing them. But it didn't get nearly as, there weren't as many policy discussions, and sometimes not as much controversy as there are now. And then, of course, as soon as there's a controversy, the legislature steps in. And we all know that's a great idea, to have them provide some wonderful one-size-fits-all guidance for every county, whether it be Salt Lake County or Daggett. So these are examples of the different kinds of acts that I'm talking about. Legislative acts, that involves the general plan, the annexation, zoning ordinance, the wording of the ordinance, the zoning map, some development agreements, depends on exactly what it involves, and some planned unit developments. I don't mean to be too fuzzy here, but a lot of it just depends on whether or not we're talking about a big development, a lot of impact, or one that isn't, and also the way the county ordinances structure the review of development agreements. On the other side, when a person comes in for a subdivision approval or a conditional use permit or a site plan approval, a building permit, when the appeal authority meets to decide appeals and variances, those are all administrative acts. So I just want to talk briefly about the different categories and how they are interpreted by the courts. What's the local discretion? So in the law, it says that a decision is valid and will be upheld if it's challenged in court, as long as it's not arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. Illegal, we understand somewhat. Of course, it just means it's not consistent with the law. And what we mean by that is, as the judge interprets and applies the law. Sometimes that can be a little hard to predict. Arbitrary, capricious, however, is a different story. And when we talk about legislative acts, if an ordinance could promote the general welfare, or is even it's reasonably debatable that it is in the interest of the general welfare, then we will uphold it. This is from the Utah Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, 1998, a clear statement that basically says we don't want to be the planning commission. We judges want to let you be the planners, write the ordinance, interpret it. If it's debatable that it's in the public interest, then we're going to support your legislative decisions. It's called the law of the stupid staff. If the staff can't come up with a good reason that the judge should support this legislative act, then we need a new staff. Because the threshold's very low. Again, great discretion to local government on setting up the ordinance. And that is, well, let me show you an example. This is Draper. The brown spot in the middle is a larger piece of property, several acres, and it's zoned for business. I'm sorry, it's zoned for residential. It's master planned for business. So this is a picture of the property. You can see behind this property there are some pretty nice homes, and Harmon's comes along to build a grocery store. They're confident because the master plan says, the general plan says, we're going to have this be commercial. So Harmon comes in and tears down all the houses and gets ready to build a store. This is the front of a Harmon store. Very nice. Do you know what the back of a Harmon's grocery store looks like? Which one will be next to the neighbors? The back. And so the neighbors, nice people, they come in and they object. And the planning commission says this is consistent with the general plan. Harmon's has provided all these studies. We've got a feasibility study, we've got a site plan review, we've done all the topo maps, we've done the landscaping plan, we show structural, we got all these drawings, everything. We even have this economic study. The great sucking sound you'll hear once the store opens is sales tax dollars from Sandy coming into Draper, because it's right on the boundary. And so the planning commission, the planning staff says, this is a great idea, let's approve it. The city council decides against it, listens to the neighbors and says, we just don't think it's a good idea. Well, Harmon says, excuse me, you don't think it's a good idea? And the city says, yeah, we just, we zoned it for commercial, we plan to put commercial zone, but since you're asking us to install the zone now, it's a legislative issue, that's how we draw the map, and we've decided not yet. We're not saying never, just not yet. This isn't the proposal we want for this property. So Harmon's sues and goes to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals says, we know of no decision, no court opinion in Utah or any other state where the city council's decision to assign a zone to a given piece of property has been overturned simply on the basis that it was stupid. And that's not a technical legal term. That's not the term that Harmon's used in their legal arguments. But that's what they were saying is, you've got all these reasons why you should do it. The only reason you don't want to do it is because the neighbors are concerned. So that can't be a legitimate reason. This is textbook arbitrary. But the court said, no, all the city has to say is that there's any reason here that this isn't appropriate at this time. And all the city needed to say was, we just think it's too intrusive a use right on the property line between those neighbors and the proposed site. So the court said, city wins. Now notice, they also in this case said the property, or the Harmon's lost. If the city had approved Harmon's and the neighbors had sued, the city would still win. In other words, it isn't the decision to deny or not, it's the discretion given to the local government in how they draw the map and write the rules. Any question or comment or thought about that? Sure. They could still say no because it's a legislative issue. There is no rule for precedent in the law. And I remember dozens and dozens of phone calls having with property owners who'd call me and give concerns. And they'd say, they just have to do it for this reason and this reason and this reason. And I would say to them, Those are great arguments, but they're policy arguments. They're not legal arguments. In other words, there could be all kinds of reasons to say yes or no, but the court is not going to require a yes or no. It's just up to the city or the county to decide where you want the zoning map, those colors on the zoning map to be. It's almost entirely up to you. With rare exceptions, they're probably not worth taking the time to talk about. Now that said, this is a picture of a sign right on that property saying, "Here comes the new Harmons." And here's a picture of the Harmons that was built on that property. Now what happened? Why is there a Harmons there when Harmons lost this case? Good point. It could have been an election. Harmons could have spent money instead of on lawyers. It hurts me to say this. They could have supported somebody in the municipal elections who was more inclined to want those sales tax dollars. They also could change their proposal. If you look at this, the original proposal was to have the back of the store to the west. The back of this store, as you know your geography, those are the Wasatch Mountains. The back of the store is to the south. And if you look at what's on the west side of this property, it's a single level of shops. And behind those shops is a landscaped area back to the neighbor's property lines. If that was in Elko, they'd call it a national park. I mean, it's beautifully landscaped. And in other words, Harmons had to listen and start responding to the policy questions with some good policy arguments, because the law didn't get them what they needed. They needed to play nice and put something together that people could support. I wouldn't be surprised if the motion to deny was a split vote. I wouldn't be surprised if the motion to approve was a split vote. And I remember sitting in a packed meeting in the little town of Plain City, where I live, some years ago, and someone stood up and said, "We've got hundreds of people here telling you we don't want a convenience store." Now, Plain City doesn't have a convenience store at this time. 6,000 people, not a convenience store. We have to go to Far West or Ogden to buy a soda. Anyway, I digress. And some lady, a voter, said, "How many people do I have to convince?" And I felt like standing up and say, "Well, 3, there's 5 people on the council here. It's just up to the council to decide what they want to do." Any question or thoughts? Okay. So let me just kind of show you how broad this discretion is. This is a case called Smith Investment. Property is actually just a little bit north of that property we're just looking at in Draper. It's vacant. It's 13 acres. There's land there where it can be developed. It has an old shopping center on it. Started out as a vibrant commercial center, and at the time I take the picture, there was a fitness business in there. Not a bad business for a big store, but not the same sales tax dynamo, cash cow, that it would be if it was Costco. So Smith Investment has had this property. They're investors. They want it to be worth maximum money. It's worth a lot of money as a commercial site. So Sandy rolls in and on its own motion downzones it to R2. Now they only downzoned the front of it. The back of it, they only downzoned the back of it. The front of it, the first 300 feet, they said, okay, that could be commercial. But looking at this entire parcel, we want all that area that you can see is landscape now or in some kind of planting. We want that to develop into duplexes and small homes. And Smith Investment sued, saying your general plan is commercial. We bought it thinking it was going to be commercial. We counted on it being commercial, and you stripped value. The appraiser who testified said, yeah, that the land's probably worth $500,000 less. Well, this was 1998. I mean, back then, $500,000 was real money. You know, you could buy a house for $500,000 back then. And the court said, wow. You got the quote on your material there. Some people win, some people lose. It's the price we pay to live in an ordered society. You guys are investors. Investments go up, investments go down. If you want to take advantage of your investment, then build something. You're locked in then. But don't count on the city always doing everything in the public interest that ends up making your property worth. In this case, I think dividing it into single family lots would be really important. Today, you know, 27 years down the road, it'd be even more important to have a place for starter homes. And the court basically said it's up to the city. So I'm repeating myself. Any comment or question? I welcome opposing points of view if anybody has one. Okay. Yes. No. That's exactly right. This is a takings case. If they had eliminated all use, if they had said, okay, we're going to change the zoning to city park, and you can't use it for anything but a park, that would be a taking. But the court said selling residential lots is a viable use. In fact, today, and that configuration, the highest and best use of that property would be residential, because there'd be so much value there in today's market. Okay. So just an example, legislative rules. This is the Home Depot up in Summit County. It looks different than the one I go to in Ogden. The one I go to in Ogden is orange, on orange. And in Summit County, they said, we may let you make your letters orange for that sign, but we want landscaping, we want architecture, we want trusses and stone, and we want a decorative roof. And Home Depot said, well, we don't want to, or they might have. And Summit County said, well, then don't build. This is these are legislative acts. They set up those design standards. There's no question, it's debatable that it advances the general welfare to have things look nice. I'm quoting Justice William Brennan from the United States Supreme Court, and that's fully legal. It may not be politically wise, it may not be what the public wants in every community, but it's not a legal issue, it's a policy question. Another one, this is a lot into the area of what we now call hideout, and it says there's a 57-acre piece of property, and it says this is a development potential. Well, at the time this picture was taken, the zoning was 40 acres per unit. 1 unit for every 40 acres. If somebody bought this, would they have the right to sue saying that's not enough development? No. Now, obviously, it's hideout now. I would imagine there's 200 units. Or there are probably I don't know how many on 57 acres, but there could be a lot of units. And it was a policy decision. It's not a the development proceeds. Okay. So again, legislative acts, the Planning Commission recommends and the elected legislative body decides. And the court stays out of it. So now let's switch bases, our perspective here, and talk about administrative acts. And this is the area where we end up getting more questions, sometimes controversy, and it gets a little out of whack. An administrative land use decision will be upheld if it's supported by substantial evidence in the record and is legal. A land use decision of a land use authority is an administrative act, even if the land use authority is the legislative body. So when the county commission does any of these things, subdivisions, site plan approvals, those kinds of things, it's still administrative, even though the legislative body does it. And the state legislature, in its infinite wisdom, I was cautioned by a state senator to always use the word infinite when describing the wisdom of the state legislature. They recently said the elected officials cannot be the final decision maker in a subdivision approval. That has to be done by someone else. And in most cases, what that means is more late nights for the planning commission. But the legislature, again, is the body in charge, and they got into more and more trouble where the county had, or the city had decided what the zoning is and approved the density, and then became reluctant to actually approve a subdivision plat when it came to approve. And the problem is that if the policy decision, which the courts will uphold, is that this density is fine, when someone comes in with that density, then the administrative decision is to follow the ordinance and approve it. And that's where it gets to be more interesting. So the legislature has articulated this rule in this way. An applicant is entitled to approval of a land use application if the application conforms to the requirements of the applicable land use regulations, land use decisions, and development standards in effect when the applicant submits a complete application and pays application fees. There's a couple of exceptions to that, and I don't want to necessarily get into it too deep here. You can see them in your written material, and we'll talk about it if you would like. But this is the general rule. The land use authority for subdivisions, that's always the planning commission or the staff, must thus determine whether legally and factually the application complies with the ordinance. If it does, approve the application. If it does not, deny it. In either case, explain why on the record. Question about that? I have stories to tell if that's helpful. Okay, we need to talk just briefly about conditional use permits so the story I'm about to tell makes sense. So in Utah law, you can have three different kinds of uses in your ordinance: permitted uses, prohibited uses, and conditional uses. So if a use is permitted, that's fine. If it's prohibited, that's clear. But a conditional use often is confusing because in the old days, people thought, okay, well, if we don't like it, we can turn it down. And the legislature did their best to make that not a viable option. What the legislature is saying is a conditional use shall be approved if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards. So the idea is there are supposed to be standards in the ordinance that the Planning Commission has recommended to the county and the county has approved. And then when a person comes in, the Planning Commission or whoever reviews this, still could be the county commission, asks a couple of questions. One, are the reasonably anticipated negative aspects of this use? Can they be mitigated? If so, what conditions would mitigate them? That's the whole conversation with a conditional use. So to review it, we have to explain we have to do like the math teacher told us in high school, we have to show our work. So we have to lay on the record the reasons why we approve the use and what conditions we're attaching to it and how they deal with the negative aspects. Sometimes when a conditional use application comes in, a person who's not familiar with the land use process might say, well, this is a great opportunity. We'll just put on this application in our approval any condition we think would be nice. But that isn't the way this works. You have to identify what the negative aspects of the use are and then how they can be mitigated and what reasonable conditions can mitigate them. It's important to note the word is not eliminate, but mitigate. You have to make it better. I served as the hearing officer for Salt Lake City, and an appeal came to me where the neighbors were concerned because the city had approved some telephone connector boxes between the sidewalk and the curb. They were large telephone boxes. And the neighbors said, those are ugly. And I said, okay, but they're conditional use and they've been approved. The decision to approve them said what color they had to be and where they had to be. And those, you're saying ugly is a negative aspect, and these conditions appear to mitigate the issue of appearance. They said, well, we just don't think it should be there. And I said, I'm sorry, but the city council already made that decision. They said these uses are appropriate here. We're just going to condition them when they come. It's not a question of whether the use is appropriate. That decision was made, the legislative body in all its discretion, when the use was listed in the ordinance as a permitted or conditional use. And again, the council, the commission has all this discretion on what of all the thousands of things you can put in the ordinance that are permitted, conditional, or prohibited, they could put anything anywhere. And this is what they came up with. So I, as the authority, the appeal authority, have no authority to second guess the decision of the city council. My job is simply to interpret and apply it. In this case, these boxes are perfectly legal because the approval includes reasonable conditions that mitigate the negative aspects of the box. That make some sense? Okay. So this is in the materials. This is the lovely environs of Utah County, southern Utah County. Enjoy it while you can. It's only going to be there 10 years, and then it'll all be gone too. This is down in the bucolic area of Benjamin. A few may know where that is. That's northwest of Spanish Fork. It's level, it's fertile, it's just a terrific. But it used to be under Lake Bonneville. And we know when we had Lake Bonneville, there were wave actions, and some of the things that happened were some reallocation of minerals. So in the circle there, you can see an area along the side of the mountain to the west of Benjamin, which has some very nice materials, minerals, that are available and needed for construction along the Wasatch Front. So Kilgore Companies comes along and builds an asphalt plant there. So this is the best I could get from Google Earth on what that plant looks like. Now, as you can imagine, the people on the valley floor are not really, you know, if you asked them to list the things they like most about Benjamin, the Kilgore batch plant would probably not rank very high. They'd call that low. And they'd even probably not get real positive about hundreds of dump trucks hauling asphalt down through the city streets of Benjamin to the main intersection, always stopping to a perfect stop, I'm sure, and slowly making the right turn to go up to the interstate where they could take their asphalt to be up to the public works projects. That's right, never using their jake brake. So Kilgore comes in, they have a conditional use permit. They got it. The county said these critical building materials, a term the legislature created, by the way, are essential to the public good. We're going to allow them to use this area to extract these minerals, and we're going to condition it. And so the county set a limit on the number of trucks per day and other things that were going to limit what the impact of this plant was. Those silos are critical, of course, to prepare the material and then distribute it as necessary into the trucks that are going to haul these materials away. They're tall, and everything's running fine at the batch plant, except they are so busy they want to build more. They want more silos. And they're not going to exceed the number of trucks they've been allowed. They've never really come up to the level that they're allowed yet. They just want some new capacity. Well, it just so happens that the ordinance says if you build anything over 40 feet tall, you have to get another conditional use permit. And so they're saying, okay, county, we need to build 2 100-foot towers or 5 40-foot towers. Which one would you rather we build? And they go to the county planning commission, which is the final decision maker on this conditional use permit. And every property owner in Benjamin is in the room, I think. At least that's the impression they got. And they were all celebrating the fact that Kilgore was being really even more busy than they thought. And we refer to it affectionately as public clamor. There were a lot of concerns expressed, and the Spanish Fork, the Utah County Planning Commission turned Kilgore down. The only good thing about that is it makes a really good story to tell, because the Court of Appeals said, county, if you're going to turn something down, you've got to show the negative aspects can't be mitigated. And basically, every single thing you said in your opinion, in your decision, every single thing that was brought up in the public hearing had to do with the existing operation and had no reference whether their new silos were going to be 100 feet tall or 40 feet tall. The only thing you had jurisdiction over was whether the silos are 60 feet or 40 feet tall or 100 feet tall. And because you didn't focus on that, your decision is overturned. And it was held to be illegal. Kilgore won this appeal. So basically, the idea is that even though this is a beautiful area, and even though this is scenic, and I mean, the court is not going to look at these issues. The county commission already did. The commission decided, balancing all the factors, there should be a batch plant there. And once that decision is made, then it's not a matter of, until the citizens change the county commission's opinion and change the law, then anyone who comes in and applies for a batch plant gets the approval, because it's consistent with the law. But a couple of things we learned in this case. The evidence provided by company officials based on their expertise was held to be substantial evidence. So the idea is you can only make a decision based on evidence, and the evidence has to be in the record. So when someone comes and provides evidence at a public hearing on an administrative rule, that then is something that the county can rely on in making a decision. The second one here, the analysis by the county planning staff was held to be substantial evidence. I mean, they're experts. And if they come in and have an opinion about whether it's consistent with the general plan, consistent with the ordinance, meets the criteria, that's evidence that can be relied upon. The company officials certainly have a dog in the fight, but that doesn't mean they're not experts. That goes to the credibility of their testimony, the weight of their testimony, but not to the admissibility of their testimony. Now that sounds like a bunch of trial jargon, and it is in a way, because when a court tries to hear evidence and make a decision and sort out people's rights, it's dealing with those rights, and so are you. So when somebody challenges decisions of the Planning Commission, they challenge it based on the same standards they would if a judge or jury made a wrong decision in opposition to the evidence. So in this case, Kilgore said, this is not going to have any negative effects at all for these reasons. The staff said, we recommend you approve this. It's the way it's proposed with the conditions suggested is consistent with the ordinance. These are the negative aspects, and yes, they can be mitigated, so we as a staff recommend we approve it. And then it says, the statements of the general public about matters of professional expertise, including hearsay statements about what a realtor said, was not substantial evidence. Now, if a realtor came up and said, I'm a realtor, or I'm an MAI appraiser, if you let them build 60 or 100-foot towers instead of 60-foot towers, it will depreciate property values on the valley floor by 30%. Now that's substantial evidence. That's an expert. But the citizens coming without that expertise and trying to propose what they're saying as evidence would not be held by a court to justify a decision. So the citizens certainly in these cases have an opportunity to present evidence, but it has to be evidence. And in this case, what the court said is, it wasn't in this case. Comment or question? So again, In the administrative arena, if an application complies with the ordinance, we have to approve it. If we don't approve it, we have to show by substantial evidence in the record why we didn't, how it is not consistent with the ordinance. Of course, by approving it, we have to show on the record how it is consistent with the ordinance, but the burden's on the applicant. I mean, it's not the county's job to prove that it's consistent with the ordinance. The applicant has to, and that's why you have all those engineer stamps and all that other stuff saying this is consistent with the ordinance. Here's the site plan. Here are the building permit, the drawings. It's all consistent, and here's my stamp as a certified engineer. And if there are other policy questions, whether it complies with some language of the ordinance, often the applicant has a duty to bring the legal help. But in this case, the applicant, according to the court, did a great job. And those who were opposed to it did not reach the same standard. Question about that or comment? Sure. Yes, often, and that's one of the difficulties that the legislature has acknowledged, and one of the reasons why the legislature has, wide, for example, eliminated the opportunity for elected officials to review subdivisions. And that, in every case, that may or may not have been a good idea. But the impression of the legislature was, as legislative body, as elected officials, you're so in tune to the public, as you should be, that often it's to decide which you're wearing. Whether you're doing your policy making, do what the people want hat, or whether you're trying to accomplish what the courts and the legislature and city do, and that's make unbiased, legitimate administrative, just a legal decision based on the narrow facts in front of you. And so it ends up being difficult to do both things. That's not impossible, because that's what you do. You function as a planning commission in both the legislative arena, looking at suggested changes and recommending what be done, and the administrative arena, where you might be the ones that approve a subdivision. Yes, sir. Sometimes it's a little different, and I'm not able to understand exactly how the Court of Appeals functions and why they do what they do. In the book, there's a different story. It's a little older, and I tell you this because it's a fresher story. But in the one in the book, the Court of Appeals said the conditional use permit's issued, despite West Jordan's refusal to issue it. In this case, Kilgore's building the new facility. I'm not sure whether they went back. I'm not sure whether it was remanded and with this understanding, or whether the court simply said to the trial court, go ahead and enter findings based on the evidence in the record, and that is that this complies with the ordinance, and issue the permit. Yeah. So let me tell you a story. Here's another one. Oh, you've got that one in there. Sure. And that's the question the story's going to deal with. So let me pause at this slide for just a second. What substantial evidence is? It means evidence that's beyond a scintilla. It's a value. It's credible. It's admissible. That is, it's relevant. It's credible, and it's independent, or at least you can weigh its independence and truth. So there has to be evidence to support the conclusion. So this is Moab, and in this photo, you can see the development. Of course, the upper corner of the picture is Red Rock, And as you look along the line of that red rock, you'll see a cul-de-sac there in the shape of a V. So the cul-de-sac starts about the lower center of the picture, goes to the right, and then comes back. And there's like 18 or 20 homes on that cul-de-sac. So someone at the end of the cul-de-sac comes in and says, I want to build a bed and breakfast or a Vrbo Airbnb. And the county or the city ordinance says it's a conditional use. So the planning commission meets, and every one of those neighbors shows up and says, do you have any idea what a person renting that size house as a EO, how many RVs they would bring with them, how many ATVs? And the legislature has told us we have to let ATVs run as cars. So from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, we're going to have those ATVs running up and down that cul-de-sac all hours of the day and night. You can't approve this. And the city council said, okay, no, we deny it. The Court of Appeals said, we're sending it back to you, city council. And in this case, they did remand it back. The trial court had tried to develop a record on this decision, had tried to take evidence and decide whether or not they were negative uses or negative aspects of this use and how they could be mitigated. And the Court of Appeals scolded them for that, scolded the trial judge and said, it is not your job. Send it back to the city council. And by the way, city council, we're not sure how you're going. There are 2,000 grandfathered Airbnb uses of the city of Moab. Nobody noticed.
That was my question. So you would support if they'd already been using those Airbnbs and had that even if the law changed, they would be grandfathered in for that use.
Right. If the Airbnb had been established as a legal use and the law was changed to make it an illegal use, that's now called a non-conforming use. And as long as it's not abandoned for a year or the city doesn't pay compensation for closing it, then it can continue in perpetuity. So that's what has made that go down a little easier. But I don't mean to understate the legislative discretion here. If cities want to eliminate short-term rentals, it's up to the city. But until the next legislative session, and then we'll see what the legislature says. But that's the story now. Yes.
Sorry, I had it on. A lesson for us all here on the planning commission then would, on any CUPs, would use it to or look into mitigation prior to just denying. Go through any mitigation possibilities prior to, because just like in this instance, it's going to come back to you either way, or it's going to be your hand's going to be forced and it's going to be overruled.
Yeah.
So-
Well, of course, sometimes it isn't. Most of the time, even when decisions are not correct, the appeal isn't filed and people get on. But it's not discretionary to focus on conditions. That's what your job is. I mean, you are to determine what the reasonably anticipated negative effects of the use are and how they can be mitigated.
And then what those mitigation factors would be. And
Right.
I have a question. When putting conditions on, do you need to have a standard in your ordinance to put a condition on? Like, let's say a condition of noise. If you don't have a noise standard in your ordinance, can you still put that condition on?
We don't have a case exactly on point because that's a general welfare standard, and it even goes back to ancient common law. If you create such a noise that it interferes with the peaceful, quiet enjoyment of your neighbor's property, that person has a cause of action against you for a nuisance, has nothing to do with the zoning ordinance. And so if in trying to deal with conditional use negative aspects, you're dealing with common law issues, the general welfare and health safety, those kinds of things, it's going to be tough to challenge conditions that are imposed based on that. But the state statute says there need to be conditions in the ordinance. And so the best way to do, and I'm sorry I haven't looked at the county ordinances for that purpose, it's best to put some standards in there, like the things to abate potential nuisances, or things to handle traffic and unusual traffic, or disruptive hours, or things like lighting and those kinds of things that could be put generally in an ordinance saying these are the kinds of things we'd look at. The problem is whenever we use subjective language in an ordinance, we open up a lot of room for misunderstanding on both sides of the decision-making table. Sometimes the decision makers are accused of overreaching, and sometimes the public is told they don't understand that these are more limiting than they appear. Because having an ordinance that says that the conditional use should have conditions that generally are good, that would be a little loose for an ordinance. But if they're dealing with specific types of issues, that can be quite good, quite supportive of the decision maker when it comes to a challenge. But I do have a story to tell. So out of the Moab case, this is what the Court of Appeals said. It was the council's responsibility to define the basis for its decision, not the district court. Simply stated, if a city council is going to act as an adjudicating body, it needs to produce findings of fact capable of review on appeal. So that you have to show your work, like the math teacher said. So this is Clearfield, Utah. There were 2 older homes that were built in the 50s by families that could afford larger homes. The families moved on, and the county, Davis County, bought the homes and wanted to use them for a use that everyone in the neighborhood thought was just a great idea. It's right across the street from the junior high school, and the county said, we'd like to put our alcoholic treatment facility there. And every parent, every member of the PTA and their grandchildren all showed up and just clamored, and the city of Clearfield turned the county down. Now, this is an interesting dilemma because you've got 2 government entities at odds in a court case. And so the Court of Appeals hears this one and basically said, public clamor is not evidence. In this case, you had the chief of police stand up and say, in his experience, these facilities do not contribute to crime. They are not going to, we don't have any evidence there's any worsening crime associated with these treatment facilities run like the Davis County would run them. Despite that, the county commission or the city council, when they denied the conditional use, said, we're doing this because we're worried about crime. And the Court of Appeals said you have no evidence to base that decision on, and told them to build the treatment centers, let them build. And that's, of course, exactly what happened. This is Davis County Junior High. So this is what the court said. Citizen opposition is a consideration which must be weighed, but cannot be the sole basis for the decision to deny an application. The legislature this year imposed a new rule, and that is the appeal authority cannot hold public hearings. When a decision is challenged, the appeal authority must look only to the evidence as it's presented by people with standing and cannot hear public input. That's how far the legislature feels about the idea that this needs to be based on a reasonably impartial, quasi-judicial evaluation of the facts. If, however, a person has standing to challenge the decision, then the appeal authority certainly must hear that person's objection. If, for example, a property owner comes in and wants a variance for a side yard setback, and I'm the hearing officer, I'm going to want the neighbor whose side yard's infected, who owns that land at that property line, to have the chance to comment, because I think they have a separate protected interest over and above the public. This is in further answer to the question of the criteria. This photo shows two things. One, that Google Earth takes pictures in the winter and in the summer. And it also shows two separate group homes. Now, a group home for wayward youth, troubled young men in this occasion, is another one of those proposed uses that you know the neighbors are just going to have a great time. Just looking forward to that and wanting that in the worst way. And in this case, the Duchesne County heard an application for a group home in the lower triangle or lower square. The Planning Commission approved it with conditions. The Duchesne County Commission, however, denied it. And in denying it, they said, we don't have the duty to approve an application that's not financially viable. And the applicant has said that the conditions imposed by the Planning Commission destroy the financial viability of the proposal. So they had come in, and the applicant had come in and said, we want to have 15 boys. And the Planning Commission said, we've looked at the health standards, we've heard from the health department, we've heard from the state officials here. They're saying your physical facility is legitimately capable of handling 10. So we're limiting you to 10. Now, did you hear me rattle off substantial evidence to support that decision? And the neighbors then appealed, and the applicant appealed too. Everybody went to the county commission to challenge it. And the county commission heard the applicant stand up and say, I need to have 15 boys or I'll go broke. The county commission said, well, then we're not going to approve because we don't need you going broke. And the Court of Appeals said, that's not a standard in your ordinance. If you didn't put financial viability in your ordinance as a condition, as a basis for your review, as a criteria, then it can't be the basis to turn down the application. So the story goes to the question you were asking about the standards in the ordinance. And there's a broad range of what I would consider to be quality in the language in ordinances related to the conditions for conditional use. It's a good thing to look at and consider, because decisions are going to be a whole lot easier to defend if there's good criteria in the ordinance and we follow them. So back to the big picture. When we write the rules, we have broad discretion, and the courts will always favor our view. In administering the ordinances, we have less discretion, and based on the information, I'm about to share more of it with you, the property owner has the edge. So if in the application setting, if there's a question about whether it's illegal and it's a legitimate question, that tie goes to the property owner. Because the property owner is interpreted, the ordinance are to be interpreted in favor of the use of property if that's a legitimate interpretation. The land use authority shall apply the plain language of land use regulations. If a land use regulation does not plainly restrict a land use application, the land use authority shall interpret and apply the land use regulation to favor the land use application. So this is the wording from the legislature. Let me tell you another story. So this is I'm going to talk a little bit about non-conforming use case, and so let's talk about that again. And we've touched on this earlier. A non-conforming use is one that was legal when it was created, but the law has changed so it wouldn't be legal now, but it has never been abandoned. So this is, I don't know whether you can see that, whether the resolution's good enough, but that beautifully painted sign on the left-hand side says Backyard Auto. And this is West Valley City. The neighbors in the area said, well, no, actually not in our backyard. So the city came in and said to the owner of this automobile recycling facility, junkyard, that he was out of compliance. He said, well, I'm non-conforming, it's always been here. And they said, well, no, but you haven't sold any cars in the last year. We watched you. You don't even have a business license. So therefore, you can't, your use was abandoned. It's been a year. This is an aerial photograph of the area where it is. It's out by where the Rocky Mountain Raceway used to be, I guess. Did they move it? So this goes to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals, well, imagine this is like the conversation that went on between the court and the lawyers for both sides. They might have asked Mr. Castor's attorney, okay, what's the story? And he said, well, we've kept this use in place for all these years, and the city's telling us we've abandoned it. And the court might turn to the city and say, okay, what's the basis for your analysis? And the city said, well, he hasn't done any business. He doesn't have a license. He hasn't sold any parts for a year. Everyone agrees. That's the fact. It's agreed, stipulated. So he's got to shut her down. And then the court said, okay, what does the ordinance say? The ordinance defines a recycling auto junkyard use as to keep or store or sell auto parts. And the court said, okay, so city, you wrote the ordinance. Grossly paraphrasing, you write the ordinance and we'll enforce it just the way you write it. You used the word or. You didn't use the word and. So if he keeps or stores or sells, his use continues. End of case. Go ahead and keep keeping or storing. Because the city, in its decision, used the word or instead of and. So often in our business of reviewing applications, we have to interpret the ordinances. And this case simply suggests that where the ordinance could be interpreted in favor of the use of property, that's how we need to do it. Question about that? This is the beautiful suburban area of Sandy. Very nice, lovely neighborhoods. This golden arrow points to Steve Brown's house. Steve Brown owns this individual home and decided he would rent it by the day instead of by the month. Now this case goes back to 1998. If Steve Brown had any idea what he was onto, he would be a bazillionaire today. But this is 4 years before the licensing of an entity called Airbnb. And he had some friends that had a little website called the Sandy Ski Houses. And they would rent to families, particularly from California, who'd come up to ski at Alta. And instead of trying to cope with the general cost of housing, they could rent this house and a group of people of some size could use it. all of which is fine with Steve and fine with the skiers, and no problems from Alta or Snowbird. But the neighbors would be very concerned. The neighbors found beer cans in the gutter. And the teenager children of the neighbors would be up all night looking at what's going on in Steve's backyard instead of getting sleep before they get up early for Sunday for church. So the city came in and said, Steve, you got to shut it down. It's illegal. And Steve said, show me where it's illegal. And the city said, I'm not making this up. The story's in the book. It says right here, our residential areas are meant to be peaceful, quiet areas for family enjoyment. And Steve's lawyer said, that's it? That's where you say he broke the law? Because the ordinance says that the ordinance is supposed to create areas of peaceful, quiet enjoyment? And the city said, oh, and also, it says it's a family area and you're renting a hotel. The Court of Appeals said it this way. Because zoning ordinances are in derogation of a property owner's common law right to unrestricted use of his or her property, provisions therein restricting property uses should be strictly construed, and provisions therein permitting property uses should be liberally construed in favor of the property. So basically, they said, Steve's renting to families. They're just Californians, but they come here as families and they rent his house. Nothing in your ordinance says, there's no time limit in your ordinance, minimum or maximum. Are houses in this area rented? Well, certainly. You know, people rent them for a month or a year or longer. And the judge said, well, it's the same deal. They're just renting them for a shorter period. If you want to regulate it, you can, but you didn't. So therefore, what Steve's doing is legal. If you want him to get a business license, pass a license ordinance, he'll have to get a license. If you want to restrict other ways, you know, things that make it more compatible, great. But you can't prohibit the use because it was legal when you established it. And of course, now it's a grandfathered use. Sandy did solve the problem. They bought Steve's house. But that, you know, this has been stated in the same language in 8 or 10 different cases that have come down in the last 20 or 30 years. And the legislature has adopted similar language in the state statute, land use statute. So the bottom line basically is we have great discretion to write the ordinances the way we wish, but we need to enforce them. And if they clearly prohibit a use, the plain language, no problem. The use is prohibited. If it's conditioned or limited in plain language, no problem. But if the language is not clear and it can be read, it's ambiguous and it can be read two ways, then the property owner's use is the use that's favored by the interpretation that's favored. Question or comment? Okay. By the way, the ordinances, of course, have to be followed by the city as well. So let me explain this case. This is at Springville, and in this area photographed at the Fitness Springville is a subdivision that was approved by the city. Springville Citizens was a group of neighbors, and they filed suit and challenged the approval of the subdivision. This case is the landmark case on local ordinances, their interpretation and application, and the rights of citizens to challenge the decisions. So again, this is third party. This is a group of neighbors that made the challenge. So Springville approved the subdivision. The citizens challenged it. It gets to in this case, the Youth House. And again, this is a gross paraphrase, but if it was a conversation going on, this is how they would have gone on. So the court said, so what's the problem? And the citizens would have said, the city didn't follow its rules when it approved the subdivision. The court said, well, okay, what didn't they do? And the citizens said in their briefing, well, there's a provision in the ordinance that says before you can approve a subdivision plat, if it has a canal on it, you have to have the signature of the canal company saying that the plat drew the canal correctly. And it's not on there. And there were other technical problems with the, just the details of how the ordinance was, or how the plat was approved. So the court might turn to the city and say, okay, what's the story? And the city said, well, here's a letter from the canal company. It says right here, okay, it's drawn correctly. So yes, we didn't do it before the hearing. We didn't do it before the approval, but no harm, no foul. It's fine. It's on there. It's drawn right. I mean, you certainly can't require us to be held to that kind of a standard where we have to do all that beforehand. And if we don't do it, then the whole thing's out, the baby and the bathwater. And the court may have looked to the city and said, well, who wrote the ordinance? And the city said, well, we did. And the court said, well, it's not us imposing the requirement, then, is it? You impose the requirement. We're just telling you, if you impose that requirement on yourself, you need to follow it. And if you don't, your decision's invalid if it's challenged within the proper time frame. And so at this point, the citizens are getting really excited and saying, great, we won this case. And then the court turned to the citizens and said, okay, just one last question. So what? And the Springville Citizens case stands for the proposition that the only people who have the standing to challenge local administrative decisions are those who have been uniquely prejudiced by the decision. You got to show us how this affected some substantial right of yours, and thus demonstrate you even have standing to challenge it. Because if you're only generally affected as you were in this case, like everyone else in town, by the approval of the subdivision, you simply don't have standing. You've got to show something more than just the general impact on the public. You've got to show how your situation was uniquely prejudiced in a way that involves a substantial property right. Comment about that? We've had recent activity. Just the first of last year, there was a case that came down in Monticello. It's called the Northern Monticello Alliance versus San Juan County. And down there they have a wind farm, turbines. The turbines were built with a conditional use. A period after the building, just a couple of years, a group of neighbors came in and said they're not complying with the conditional use. They didn't do what they said they would do. And the Planning Commission held a hearing, decided to allow the conditional use to continue. It was appealed, and the County Commission determined that it would be the appeal authority. And they held another hearing, and they held at the hearing, the owners of the turbines were told they could provide information responding to whether or not they were complying with the conditional use permit. But the County Commission refused to let the neighbors speak. It brought the appeal. The Utah Supreme Court, on hearing the neighbors' challenge, and I still find this somewhat interesting, the court said that's right. The citizens that brought the appeal had standing to challenge the conditional use permit for the turbines, but they didn't show they had a property right interest that justified them presenting evidence in the argument. So the good news is you've got good legal advice and can work through all this stuff. I mainly explain it to illustrate that it's not very cut and dry. And both the courts and the legislature have done quite a bit lately to narrow the scope of who has standing to argue these land use cases. That being said, of course, there are other areas where the public in particular has developed new rights and has new opportunities we didn't recognize before. When I wrote this first version of this book 20 years ago, there was nothing in here about referenda or initiatives. Well, now there is. And we have, of course, there's a lot of opportunity for citizens to do a lot in terms of writing new laws and changing existing laws and reversing decisions that enact the law through the referendum and initiative process. That's a different story. This Monticello case deals with specific administrative approvals. Now, I've rambled on and on. Are there specific questions you have? I'd certainly welcome your comments because I'm not the only one with any expertise in this area in the room. Sure. Yes. Anything. It doesn't matter. Like the court in the Harmon's case, the court said we know of no decision from Utah or any other jurisdiction where the decision to deny a zone was overturned on the basis that it was stupid or that it was arbitrary and capricious. I mean, you don't need to. All the city had to do in that case was say, yes, the general plan does not bind the zoning map. Now hold that thought because the legislature is talking about it this year. The legislature is actually considering linking them. So if the general plan shows a use, then the zoning map must be adjusted when someone asks for an adjustment. But that has not yet happened. So if the zoning map does not show the use, if the ordinance doesn't show the use, and somebody comes in and says, we want to add this use to the ordinance, it's a legislative choice, and it is completely a policy question. It's not a legal one. With just narrow exceptions. If somebody basically comes in and says, my land is useless under your ordinance, you have to amend it or it's a taking because I don't have any use at all, then we involve legal counsel and look at those issues and decide. But generally speaking, land use decisions about the map, about the ordinance wording, annexation, those kinds of things are just completely policy questions that judges don't want to get involved. Other thoughts or questions? Let me just look at the list here and see. I just hate to quit 10 minutes early, I've got a reputation as a lawyer to protect that I can go on and on. Sure. And that's a good one. The Ombudsman's Office, by the way, they write advisory opinions that will actually analyze a given question and provide a legal conclusion. The most common question people ask of the Ombudsman is this one, and that's conditions on development. So turn it to those two sides and what they say. A condition on development is called an exaction. And an exaction is a neutral word. It's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing. It's just a condition on development. A development exaction may be imposed if an essential link exists between a legitimate government interest and the condition, the exaction, and it's shown to be proportionate. So impact fees are exactions, road improvements are exactions. Sometimes, with a huge development, other things like parklands and amenities can be exactions. So the question in part is administrative or legislative. If it's an administrative issue, the only question is, does this application comply with the ordinance? If the ordinance does not give us permission to require them to donate extra land for a road or to put in street improvements, we have to approve it without those requirements. But if we can put in requirements, and I don't know who can't, but I'm assuming any subdivision ordinance is going to provide standards for streets. All we have to show is that there's a reasonable relationship in both scale and burden between the burden the property owner is imposing on the system of city or county services and the burden we're imposing back on the property owner. So impact fees must go through an analysis that show that it's fair. What is the burden of a new home? What does it cost us? Okay, here's an impact fee. We're not going to charge more than this. We might charge less, but we won't charge more. If we look, for example, at a subdivision on a public street and we require the street to be widened to meet current street standards because it didn't meet the previous standards, that's very likely going to be completely legitimate because it's roughly proportional. It doesn't have to be precisely. The mathematical analysis doesn't have to be precise. According to the leading opinion, it was written by he was a justice on the Utah Supreme Court for a while. It seems like the name was Dallin Oaks. Somebody you may have heard of. Anyway, he wrote the exactions opinion. So if everything's basically in balance, if we're only imposing burdens in terms of dollar cost on the developer, that's roughly equivalent to the burden that his development is placing on the county, then we're in good shape. The county typically bears the burden of showing that it is roughly proportionate. But it's not unusual in a zonings change for that system to be a little different. And here we're getting into an area the Utah courts haven't spoken on. The legislature is about to. The development community has expressed some concern about this. It's not as clear-cut if somebody wants a zone change, because a zone change is discretionary, as I've said 3 times. So if someone comes in for a zone change, there's a large development in a community near me that may include as many as 500 acres that will involve several thousand homes. And the owner of this property who said, I'd like to develop now, was told, this is not going to be a problem if you'll put together in this whole sprawling development a really nice 10-acre park. I don't think that's inappropriate. The zoning is not there. The density is not locked in. And the city already has a bunch of parks. So if you can show that this amount of new park space is going to be consistent with the ratio of citizens to other park space in town, that's not going to be a problem. Plus, you don't have to approve the zone change. You don't have to approve the density. And so it can be a little bit of let's make a deal. But if the developer are able to prove, based on information in the record, that the only reason the development was turned down was because of what the court decided was an illegal exaction, then that's a problem. So, how's that for a long answer to a short question? So, pardon?
So, Craig, can you speak about that as former ombudsman? Is an advisory opinion by that office, is it binding on the county or on the courts?
Question. That whole process started the last year I was ombudsman. I wrote the first 7. I'm only responsible after that. By the way, one of them is from Morgan County. There was a subdivision going on near Mountain Green, and a statewide environmental entity was opposing it, and I had to decide whether they had standing. And I think I wrote that opinion. I chose to conclude they didn't have the particular property interests that would give them the standing to challenge the decision. Anyway, the advisory opinions are only advisory. That's what they're called. Except if a judge later decides that the case is resolved on the same basis the advisory opinion resolved it, and the decision is basically consistent with the advisory opinion, then that court decision can trigger legal fees that are due to the losing party if they went to court instead of agreeing with the advisory opinion and the judge agreed with the advisory opinion after. That makes sense. Other questions? Okay, well, I'll let you have your meeting back.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.
I just need an idea of how many of these I can leave with you. Sure. Good question. So on our property, at property rights, at utahlanduse.org, there are yearly updates that are posted there. We do have a 2025 version. We have a 2024 as well. We have a few of those here. But the 2025 update simply includes a new chapter on short-term rentals because the legislature passed the new law, and also includes the provision that appeal authorities can no longer hold public hearings. So the changes are modest, and nothing has changed in terms of the real body of the work. So again, can I just get a quick show of hands? Okay, I'll bring in a dozen, and I'll bring in a few more. Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
I do. Thank you, Juan. No. It's kind of unusual. Do you like that?
Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We are going to take a 5-minute break before we get into our next legislative agenda item, just so we can have a bio break. Thank you. We'll be back in 5.
Thank you.
If any of you have not had a chance to sign in, can you sign in over here on the table? There's a sign-in sheet there. Thank you. No, I just did. No, just I figured it was a good time to pray.
How are you? Good, are you? Good, thank you. Little blood sugar increase.
I love, snacks. I was just asking about to eat snacks. I bring these every time.
Heck yeah. Hashtag diabetes.
And there's water.
Got one. Mango.
I knew it.
Yeah. Good, how are you doing? You remember it?
That whole discussion there, I was like, oh yeah.
I wondered if you thought, huh?
Yeah.
It isn't. How's your family doing? Are they? True. Me too. I'm gonna let you have that till I get mine. You can keep it.
Thank you all for coming. We are going to move into our next item on the agenda. Our legislative item tonight is the Thurston rezone.
All right, I'll give you mine.
I'm going to let Jeremy jump into it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to the Planning Commission and the public that's come out in this evening tonight, to this meeting tonight. The item for the public hearing on the agenda tonight is for the Thurston rezone, which is application number 25.018. The applicant slash owner of the trust, representatives of such are in the audience tonight, Madam Chair. The project location is approximately 2240 West Deep Creek or Creek Road. The date of the application is May 2nd of 2025. The current zoning of the property is multiple use, which is abbreviated as MU 160, a 160 acre minimum zone. And the general plan designation shows ranch residential 10. I think there's an error in the report, Madam Chair. It's multiple use, no, natural resources and rec on the future land use map with a portion of the property zoned on that same map, or rather designated on that same map as ranch residential 10. The acreage for the property is 356.55 acres. So the request for tonight, Madam Chair, is to rezone property from MU 160 to rural residential, which is the RR10 specific designation from our zoning code, and reflect that change on the future land use map from a split designation of ranch residential 10 and natural resources and recreation to ranch residential 10 completely. Staff, having done a review on this item, noting that there is approximately the portion on the future land use map that is shown as Ranch Residential 10 makes up approximately 36 acres of that designation. And if the commission finds merit in a rezone tonight, the following findings could be considered. One, that the proposed amendment is consistent with the county's future land use goals and objectives and aligns with the future land use map, which designates a significant portion of the property as Ranch Residential 10. Two, that the proposed amendment is in harmony with existing land uses in the area. Three, that the rezone will not adversely impact the adjacent properties, many of which are 10-acre parcels or smaller. And four, that the property amendment is consistent with surrounding property sizes and zoning. Staff, in addition to the review, has completed the noticing requirements for this meeting tonight, Madam Chair, in several ways. One, the neighbors within 1,000 feet were notified by mail. The agenda was posted on the Utah Public Notice website. It was also posted on our very own county website. A sign, a large sign about this size, was posted on the property, visible from the public right-of-way, and an entry was put into the column of the Standard Examiner. Otherwise, if you have any questions for myself, or again, the applicant is in the audience tonight, happy to answer those questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If the applicant would like to give comment, I'm okay with that before public hearing. If you'd like to speak.
So my name is Norm Thurston. I'm one of the beneficiaries of the trust. I'm not one of the trustees. One of the trustees wasn't able to be here tonight. He's in Colorado and asked if I fill in his place and speak on his behalf. Called me in just a few minutes ago and asked me, here's the things I'd like you to cover. So first thing that we'd like to call your attention to is that part of what we're talking about is already RR10. And so if you actually look at the aerial photographs, it doesn't really work to say, well, this part is RR10 and then right next to it is not RR10. For the contiguity of that property, it makes sense to expand that so that the entirety of the property is all the same zoning. Because otherwise you've got this problem of part of it is and part of it isn't, and that's not very convenient. The other part is that right across the road is also RR10. So that is, again, same basic topography, same basic history, land history is also RR10. And then finally, the properties that are to the east of this are, I looked at the map, I didn't see anything to the east that was any, it's like greater or smaller, but anything that was less dense than RR10. Most of them are 10-acre lots or smaller. So if you look down the creek towards town, there's the houses that are there are mostly on smaller lots. And that area has become heavily developed. There's homes. If you've been up there, I think many of you have been up there. You know what we're talking about. That it's becoming really a residential area and it's less of an agricultural area. And that RR10, I think, is an appropriate designation because it does meet with the county's goals of providing places for rural lifestyle and rural houses so people can actually live there, but still preserve that rural feel. And on top of that, doing it this way and having it all in one would allow the possibility that a future development could be done as a cluster development, which some people believe is a better way of doing development so that you don't have houses scattered all over the property. If it's too small, you can't do that. But having it be this size would allow to do a cluster development, which again preserves at least 25% of that area would be preserved as open space, could be used for agriculture, continued use, those sorts of things. If you do it smaller than this, then that kind of cluster development becomes impractical and not financially feasible. So for those reasons, that's why we're asking to have it done so that it would make sense for the overall growth and development of the county. And let's do this in a way that makes sense for the property. Like if we're dividing by 10, there's a potential of 35, but the reality is there couldn't be 35. The topography and the hydrology both would not allow 35 units to be put in there. So I think some people might be worried, well, 35 is way too many. Well, I don't think you can get 35. Even if you just said, well, you've got to build a road, just putting access is going to put you under, it's going to start chipping into that. So it's not going to be, there's no way it could be 35. It would have to be less than that. So I think that's what we're asking for. It seems like a reasonable request. We would encourage your support.
Thank you. Questions for Jeremy or the applicant before we get a motion and move into public hearing?
Jeremy probably needs to clarify, the current zoning is MU 160. It's a future land use map that has a little section.
Yeah, that's the
Of the 10.
next exhibit right here. So that's the portion I was talking about. It's about 36 acres. Of our ranch residential 10 is that,
Future use,
That's a
not
future,
current.
you need to clarify, this is the future land use map,
that's the
not
future
current
land use
zoning.
map. And the current zoning shows MU 160 completely.
MU160.
Do you have a motion to move into public hearing?
So moved.
Motion by member McMillan. Second by member Wilson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Move into public hearing. Please, if you come forward to give a comment about this item, state your name for the record and speak into the mic. Thank you.
I don't know who's been living on Deep Creek Road the longest. Maybe one of these guys have me beat, but I've been there, give or take, since 1976, other than a couple of years here and there. Just wanted to speak a little bit to Deep Creek Road and some of my concerns, safety concerns, which I've spoke with a lot of people. I was here at this podium with the county council in December. Lance Crowther and I were a little concerned with the safety of the road, and we came and had a work session with Garrett was there. We talked a lot about the safety and some of the concerns with Deep Creek Road. Deep Creek Road has never been, the county has never taken proper ownership of Deep Creek Road. When I was a young kid, there was 2 tire tracks with grass in the middle. I've got a picture at my house, a single lane road. It's never been surveyed. The road, you can ask anyone at the county and they just say it's a county road. They're done dealing with us on whether it's private or public road. But in order for it to be done properly, it needs to be surveyed. That road needs to be shown where it's at. The county came and repaved it, which was awesome because it hasn't been done in 30 years, since 1995 to 1998 when they paved it originally. They got it paved, it's great. The only problem was we thought it was a little bit narrow to begin with, but it's even actually narrower now because of the way they chose to pave it. They took the paver down in one swipe instead of coming up one and going down the other. It actually made the road a little more narrow. So I measured the road back in December when we came and had a discussion with the county council, and there's a few spots on that road where you're taking a 90-degree turn and it's very narrow. My biggest concern with this rezone request, and I love the Thurston family, I just want to state that. I know a lot of these guys and I've worked butt day with them, and I really do like these guys. So my concerns isn't personal, but I do have concerns with the safety of the road. My family, we used to walk up there all the time, up and down the road. I don't encourage that as much anymore. There's a lot more traffic now, and it's not real safe. That being said, some of the concerns are, we had just an incident a couple weeks ago where there was a Life Flight helicopter up there. I don't know what happened and all, but there was a lot of EMS people coming up and down. And that road is not very safe in something like that. I would really be fearful of like a wildfire, which we've had a lot of lately up in that area. With the amount of traffic that has to come up and come down and the width of that road. That being said, in my lifetime, I've been there since '76, but I don't remember, I was 2 when we moved there. So maybe when Lance and I used to walk down to the bottom of the road and catch the kindergarten bus when we were 5, but since then I can count, I think 7 more homes that have been built since I've been there. There's about 25 homes on the road right now. And we're looking to more than double that in one rezone request. And I just don't think that's wise planning. I think if we're gonna look at something, I served on the planning commission, sat here, Steve was there with me, and that was a long time ago. I can't believe you're still taking the abuse, Steve, but.
Thank you.
But I think if we're gonna rezone, when we looked at that future land use map, I was on the planning commission when we did the general plan as well. we looked and we color coded all those properties that were along the road that made sense. This one goes way, way beyond any other rezone request that we've had at Deep Creek. I just don't think it's smart and wise planning and zoning, but my biggest concern is the safety on that road. And there's a whole nother discussion with whether the road is legally able to handle more traffic, where it was just that single lane road, and when the county decided they wanted to widen it to bring the school bus up, they didn't have permission from the landowners to go and make it wider. That being said, it's all in the past, I get that. So, but I would really, I just really wanted to show that I oppose that many homes going up Deep Creek Road. And I thank you for your time.
You'll have to forgive me. I came from a 3-hour kidney surgery.
Oh my gosh.
My name's Daryl Howard. I go by Roe. I live on Deep Creek Circle, which is 1 mile up Deep Creek Road. I got a few concerns. All my concerns are just like Brandon's. However, we've had a campfire up Deep Creek Ranch property every Friday and Saturday night since the middle of May, and nothing's been done yet. Marshall's been told about it, still nothing's been done about it. So that's a huge concern of mine. So another concern I have is I don't feel like this rezone was properly posted. I have a video August 7th at 3 o'clock of Deep Creek completely, and there is no sign posted on any property. No mention of a hearing, a rezone, a meeting, nothing. So to me, it doesn't, little bit of, no transparency whatsoever. So I have a problem with that. Sending notices to neighbors. I think out of the 4 notices that was sent, 2 of them don't even live on Deep Creek. They're owned by people in the valley. I feel like that should have been posted at the beginning of Deep Creek, so everybody on Deep Creek who's gonna be have to deal with this should have been notified. I don't think it was right the way they did it. So anyway, I'm gonna go sit down before I pass out.
So I'm Darren Stegelmeyer. I'm also a resident up Deep Creek. Before we built our house up Deep Creek, we went through a lot of process with the planning and zoning here. And what I would ask for is there to be an equitable application of the future use plan, which includes, if I have the number correct, 1,500 feet from the center of Deep Creek Road can be RR10. And I would like to see that applied in this case, where if they want to do a subdivision and include 1,500 feet as RR10, that's an option. But beyond that, it really wouldn't be equitably, I'm going to say, applied to this case. So I am asking for the plan to be applied in the case, in which the entire parcel should not be zoned as R10. It should be much like the rest of the parcels that are within that. I think it's 1,500, it might be 1,600, but it's within approximately that much of Deep Creek Road. And if you did want to bring the future use map up, you can kind of see where it would go across that property. In fact, in my opinion, one of the reasons why the other side of the Thurston family went to R10 was because this arc right here would come around with 1,600 feet from the Buxton Road. And so that would give them this portion of that property. And I know I'm drawing on that, so you can't necessarily hear it, but that portion of the property, that would be equitable under what is currently in place in the county. Beyond that, I feel like would be an overreach and also wouldn't fit with what has been planned. And that's my big ask, is let's go with what's planned. That's what we were required to adhere for when we built, I would ask that we do that for everybody else that wants to build in Deep Creek or that wants to develop or do subdivisions in Deep Creek. Thank you.
Well, I'm Marilyn Garfield, Thurston. I'm a trustee to my dad and mom's trust. They're both dead and gone. Left us with a trust account, and it said liquidate everything. 5 of us aren't going to be able to farm. 2 want to, and there's no fair way to divide everything up so that everybody gets their fair share or their fair amount of money or ground. It's just not going to happen. One person may, if you drew it out, one person may get a real crappy piece. One person, and that would probably be me, and another person will get the cream of the crop. And so I think my dad, if he wanted it to be farmed, if he wanted it to do other things, he would have put it in there. Yeah, so that's why we want to do it, rezone it, is so that we can move on with our lives. We're all getting old, and we need to figure out what to do with everything and get it done before we all die. And one other thing is, everybody up that road, well, most everybody, is a move-in, what I call them. And they got their pick of houses. They did the right things. And so I think it's only fair that anybody else that wants to come into the community get their fair share of a nice piece of property. Thank you.
My name's Dean House. I live in Deep Creek. We're probably one of the 3 agricultural mainstays in Morgan as far as Deep Creek goes. But I do have major problems with the safety of what's going on. If you were ever at my place between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 o'clock at night, trying to do your ranch work, you're a brave soul, because it's not safe. There's one place a school bus can turn around, or they pull in my driveway, past my haystack, and back out onto the road. Now, if one of them school buses gets T-boned, and I own the property and I own the road, I'm a little concerned on who's going to do what. And, you know, it's our livelihood. And we want to be, I mean, life goes on and things change, but it's got to change for the good, not the bad. And emergency vehicles, school buses, every dump truck or semi that goes up Deep Creek either always goes to the turnaround or my driveway. And my driveway is only 5/8 of a mile from the highway, so where do you think they go? You know, and I think that's something that should be considered. What about the ones that are there? Thank you.
Hello, Todd Wimpy. I live up Deep Creek as well. I'm going to come at this from a little different angle. So I am a developer. And so this is, maybe I see this a little bit differently. I do have concerns with many of the others, but I know not, concerns don't necessarily control decisions. But what I will say is, as a developer, I have projects right now that are tabled because a lot of counties and cities now are unwilling to approve zoning when they look at the end from the beginning. So, and when I look at the end from the beginning, in this project, and I love the Thurston's as well. I grew up with them and many of their kids. The road up there is not to code. So that's got to be fixed. It has to be addressed before anything can happen. Something else that's very unique about Deep Creek is not only is it a dead end, we have Deep Creek Ranches, which is hundreds of additional property owners. So it adds a completely different element to this. It's not just a dead end road with 30 houses on it. Additionally, we have a fire code, right? It says 30 houses on a dead end road. With what's up there now and what's already been rezoned, which I'm going to call lots of record, we're over. So I don't really understand how we can move forward until we basically address our current challenges and say, hey, we've got to sit down, we've got to figure this stuff out before we back ourselves into a corner and give, a zoning approval on something, because the next meeting will be, well, you gave us zoning approval, right? You gave us zoning approval, now what? You can't give us zoning approval and then tell us no, right? So I just want to be a forward thinker in this. I'm a developer, okay? But the reason I bring this up is because I'm seeing in my line of work a lot of this going on. Like, hey, we've got to figure out X, Y, and Z before we're going to allow the zoning, which then starts this whole process, right? And so those are my main concerns: the road, fire code. Additionally, to access the property that they're talking about rezoning, they would in essence be extending Deep Creek Road to get up to that upper portion of elevation. That's a major road. So they'd be in essence extending a dead end road, making it even longer. So anyway, those are my concerns. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Van Horn, and I am the property manager for Roger Thompson, who owns the property at 1820 Deep Creek. My concern and his concern is always the safety of the road. Specifically that corner just to the south of us is really sharp, right at the new driveway of our neighbor, Kyle. Roger would like to see since it's been repaved, thank you, it's nice, but everybody's driving very fast on that road now. That corner between us and Blackburn, people have left the road and gone through the fence. Well, we have a new fence now, and the fence posts are railroad ties, and they go 4 feet into the ground. And if someone leaves that corner, it's not going to be good. So I'm going to raise safety concerns. We would like to see a barrier of some sort, a crash barrier, maybe even some chevron signs, or something to kind of bring the speeds down around that corner. So that's our concerns.
Darren Crowther. I have lived up Deep Creek for 30 some odd years. And I was on the master planning commission in the county for 20 years. And this was not on that plan at all. I live across from Dean House. They turn at his place and knock my fence over. Because when they back up, and I've got ties that are in the ground, and they push it over. And we have the association above us, which is packed with people. And when I was on the master planning commission, no yurts were allowed up there. You couldn't even pull a trailer up there and leave it all year. It had to be out by winter. And that was in the law for 20 years. Now you have the association up there with hundreds of people that have their friends and their families that are up there, and there is no law beyond the gate. I've been called on by the police department to get my key so they could go through and arrest people that were raising marijuana, nudity, and all kinds of stuff that goes on up there. This would only make it worse. Now, since they put the road in, it's very nice, because when I lived there, we paid, all of us that lived on the road paid so much in order to put shale on the road because you'd sink out of sight. And sometimes you had to stay down on Morgan Valley Drive because you couldn't get your car up there. You'd bury the steep. And that gumbo mud that's up Deep Creek, if you step on it, you bring it 6 inches up on your foot. It's terrible. So the kids walked up and down the road. Brenda mentioned that. And when they'd get home, it was a muddy mess, and they were a muddy mess. And they probably went to school looking like that too. So we all chipped in so that we would at least have a gravel road. And it was substandard, but it was a lot better than it had been in the past. And then people that own mowing machines would go up either side of the road and cut the weeds that would be tall because you only had one lane. Now that we have the association up there and yurts are allowed and trailers are allowed and crime is rampant, the traffic on the road is going much faster than it should. There's signs up, 20 miles an hour, but when they hit a stretch when they can see, they put the pedal to the metal. And it's dangerous because then you come to a 90-degree turn, or up by Barkdalls, it raises up so that there's no visibility until you hit Barkdalls. And then you can see a little further up by Laurie Anderson's, but it's very poorly done, and there's blind places, and it's just not conducive to what they're asking. Not at all. One other thing I want to mention. I forgot what it was. Anyway, I don't like the idea, personally. I have friends of the Thurstons. Fred's brother, Dale, was a county commissioner for years. And when I first moved up there, I was told, we came into a meeting because the school bus couldn't go up Deep Creek. And they had big garbage containers at the first corner where it's really a dog's leg. And everybody bring their garbage there. That was a mess. But anyway, it's just not the sort of thing where we need any more traffic up there. It's bad enough as it is. And the people that come out of Deep Creek Association, they're inebriated most of the time. And I've had them off. I live across from Dean, so it drops down to my place. And to put the original road in, they took some of mine and some of Dean's, so there's a narrow place there. But I have had more than several that have gone over the road and into my place and through my fence. They have parties up there. I mean, and they are wild. When they came to get the key from me to open the gate so that the police could go up there, well, I had just come down. I'd taken my family up there in my four-wheel drive.
We're trying to limit comments to 3 minutes just to let everyone
Okay,
speak tonight.
sorry.
Is that okay? Thank
But
you.
let me say one more thing. I had seen a naked guy, and I told my wife and daughter, cover your eyes. Well, he was walking on a 2x4, balancing. That's where they were growing marijuana. So the police got the key, and I don't know how much marijuana they burned, but it was a lot. I'm not for it.
I'm Lance Crowther. I've been to a few of these county meetings just for different things, and the county and people in the meetings have said and stated that the road is not safe, yet they're still adding development to it. In some places in that road, it's 20 to or less feet wide. When Lee Stevens developed that and bought it from Dean's uncle, he bought and developed that for those lots that houses are on, and there's a few more left. They still need houses on those, and the Deep Creek Ranges up there. But a 20 to 25 foot road is not really wide and not enough to be safe and get your emergency vehicles up there. I've personally had a kid on a horse get bucked off and end up in the emergency room. I've seen horses in the canal down there. We've seen, everybody said they've seen cars off there. A lot of times when we go up the road, there's, I'm bringing cows across the road. Dean has hay coming across the road. Sometimes that road is pretty well shut down because it's just not safe. I don't know when we're going to stop, but if it keeps getting, it's just more and more, and it's a burden on all of us that have bought the original lots to do it. So these and other reasons I oppose development.
Okay, Ty Eldridge. I also live on Deep Creek Road. Deep Creek Road has never been dedicated as a public road or public right-of-way. And the county's never sought a declaratory judgment from the 2nd District Court stating that it is. I had the opportunity to work with the property rights ombudsman, not the one that was just here, not Craig, but the one that came after him, Brent Bateman. And it was the issue that the county is treating Deep Creek Road as a public road or a public right-of-way when they haven't gone through the steps that are necessary to do that. And at the end of the day, what Brent told me, the property rights ombudsman, was all the building permits they're issuing are illegal because they would need the right-of-way component to be legal. So he said, just get a tear-down order. I never did, but the county kind of fell into position about 5 years ago when they came up with essentially like a four-part plan where they would go in and survey the road, determine who owned the road, or which landowners own the road. Some of us know what we own, and then the county was going to request that the landowners dedicate the road, and if not, they would file the necessary paperwork, which is basically a lawsuit with the 2nd District Court to try to take that from us. Okay, if Deep Creek Road's a private road, we have a lot to say. If it's a public road, like you heard from the ombudsman, you can pretty well do what you want. But it's never been determined. And that Brent Bateman is a really sharp attorney, and his suggestion was just get a tear-down order. I've had other attorneys tell me the same thing. They said the county's just going to keep doing what they're doing until you make the move. So, in 2019, I granted temporary permissive use of all the paved roads on my property in Deep Creek, and I'm going to extend that today. But let's get that matter resolved. If you guys can pick that back up, just finish it off one way or the other. But Wasatch County in 2001 sought a declaratory judgment in the 4th District Court. 12 years later, they didn't have an answer. They were still battling. That went District Court, Appellate Court, Supreme Court, District Court, Appellate Court. It went on forever. But if the landowners aren't willing just to give this up, that's the only way to resolve it. The safety issues are a concern. I agree. I mean, nobody wants it, but what they've done up there recently is beautiful in terms of repaving it. I don't know why they do that. Why the county knows that this is a problem. The problem is a lot of you are new. So the people that knew it was a problem, most of them are gone. We're still landowners. We still know what's going on. But it wears you out. I mean, at a certain point, you're just like, here we go again. The definition of insanity, you know. But anyway, I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Good evening. Al Petalensek, 777 South Deep Creek Circle. Transplants. Love this town. Got introduced to the ranching community, got introduced to nonprofit. Some of you, I worked alongside you on chamber events. Just really, really appreciate this. Love this culture, learning this culture. And so many of you have embraced my family and I as we've come in. The Thurston family, I know your name from Mountains Conquered. Your name's bounced around town, like very well known family. And I really, I sympathize with the fact that there's differences in the family, and they can't settle on how to sell the land. But it doesn't have to be sold for development purposes. It's owned MU 160, and if it's sold as MU 160, somebody can buy it at affordable prices and put it in conservancy. And that might honor your father a bit better if it were used that way. Something I'd like you all to think about is Mr. Thurston's argument is if there's RR10 properties surrounding the MU 160, he should be allowed to zone his RR10 as well. There's 350,000 acres in this county. Do you want it all RR10? I mean, there's a particular culture here that we're all trying to understand what the future looks like. Is it going to be ag? Is it going to be municipal? We're not quite sure. When Todd Wimpy spoke of thinking of the end before approving the beginning, that's something I'd really like you to consider. We need to know what this town is going to be, what this county is going to be, and where we're headed. And to give permission to one family to rezone from MU 160 to RR10, great family, well-known, done things for the founders of this town. What about the next family? And the one after that, and the one after that. And pretty soon, 350,000 acres turns into 35,000 people. Thank you.
I just was just take 1 minute. He said I said something I don't think I intended to say, but I did want to just 3 quick issues. One, the problem area that everyone's referring to, guess what it's zoned? MU 160. The solution to the road issue is a county solution. But if you allow this to be RR10, whoever, and it's not going to be me, wants to propose building homes up there is going to have to come to you with a development agreement, a development plan, and they can be part of solving that road problem. You can have them be part of that. If you leave it MU 160, nobody's going to help you fix the road. And I worry because I have no idea who's going to buy it next. But we already know what MU 160 can be, and it's not good. Leaving something as MU 160 is not a good thing. It can be very problematic. So I view moving this to RR10 as not as a right or a privilege or anything like that. I just view it as an opportunity to allow part of the solution to move forward. It allows a reasonable place for homes, for people who want to build homes and live in the community. It allows the opportunity for somebody who's going to have to work with the county on a subdivision agreement to be able to help build that road and make it safer. It allows an opportunity for additional egress. We do actually have emergency egress through the other part of the property, so that could be a stipulation as well, which doesn't currently exist. The county does not have the ability to get, if that road gets blocked at that dog leg, you can't get anybody up there for any reason. But if this is developed, there's a possibility of having a secondary emergency access. So just some considerations. Don't think everything is always a problem. Sometimes things are solutions, not problems. So I just want to leave that out for you. Thank you.
Any final public comments?
I just wanted to clarify with the details in the future land use on the PDF page 25. It designates it's 1,400 feet from the center line of Deep Creek Road. And if you refer to that paragraph, I think it'd be great. I don't know if you could bring it up, anybody that's controlling it, but page 25 of the future use plan, or the Milton area plan is what it is. It's Appendix A, I believe, that it's in, but it's called low density. This area is intended to be developed at no less than approximately 1 unit per 10 acres of land. Rezoning decisions should be made or should be based on whether the current infrastructure can handle the increased density, including the increased traffic load along Deep Creek Road. The low density land use designation begins west of the current RR1 zone along Morgan Valley Drive and extends in both directions approximately 1,400 feet from the center line thereof and to the end of the paved surface of Deep Creek Road in order to promote 10 or more acre lots or lot development solely along Deep Creek Road. Zone changes that will stimulate developments that do not front Deep Creek Road are discouraged.
Thank you. Do you have a motion to move out of public hearing? Motion by member King. Second by member Telford. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous.
Madam Chair, if I could provide some context for the audience and some maybe reminder for the Planning Commission. So the scope of a rezone application is really to just look at the surrounding areas to see if the proposal has merit based on the surrounding uses and property, neighboring properties, and then it can really, I'm doing this one-handed. It's going to look at the land uses of changing from one zone with the entitlements as defined in the multiple use agriculture and rural residential districts chapter. Rezoning for one from MU160 to R10 will change the entitlements. There could be a particular use that the applicant's looking for that's allowed in MU1 or R10 that's not allowed in MU160. We as staff don't really ask the applicant what their grand plan is. We also don't look at utilities. We don't look at topography at the rezone level. Should the applicant be approved for a rezone, then the track changes from legislative to administrative, where we do get very detailed with contracted county surveyors and engineers and all of that to really get into the detail of what is actually possible. Should the applicant be approved for RR10 and perhaps not be able to get water, that would be a severe bummer for the applicant, but they would have gotten a fair shake in the process, having their entitlements changed from MU160 to R10. The clustering that was referenced by the applicant before has taken the form in our code as the planned community zone, which actually defines two tiers. Tier 1 is 50 acres or less, and Tier 2 builds on all of these submittal requirements, narrative, design guidelines, open space proposals, things like that, and adds to it in Tier 2, which would be applicable here should the applicant choose to not use the regular subdivision chapter, but rather use this newly instituted chapter as approved by the County Commission in December of 2023, which stipulates a traffic impact analysis. I think I actually went through my notes and I did have one other thing I wanted to clarify. Staff maintains the position that split zoning is never something that'll become a suggestion from our office. Split zoning introduces administrative complexity. It doesn't establish clear guidelines for enforcement of zoning law. And again, can be confusing for both applicants and staff alike when it comes to having not one, but two sets of entitlements. I think it introduces some legal complexity as well. Please let me know if you have any questions based on what I've said. Thank you.
I have a few. Okay, I had jotted down the planned community. That's a separate zone. That's not an, you don't rezone to an RR10 or whatever and then do a planned community. That's not necessary. It's a separate zone where you would come forward with a development agreement, because Mr. Thurston brought up that a development agreement would come in, but we don't require development agreements in our subdivisions. We don't allow clustering in a standard subdivision. The only clustering we would allow was with the PC zone or the resort special district, and this parcel isn't big enough for that. So we couldn't cluster, even if we wanted to, unless it has the planned community zone and not the RR10 zone.
Agreed. The applicant's request was for RR10 completely denied,
understand
and so
that.
it's running on that.
And you mentioned that you don't take facilities and services into consideration with rezones, but it says in code that that's what we should. The adequacy of facilities and services intended to serve the subject property. That's in our code that we should consider with a rezone. So I think we can look at the road. And the next thing, in slope too, is there a way to bring up, I should ask you beforehand, the geological hazard maps that show the slope of this property?
What up?
'Cause I think we need to consider that.
It's these three parcels.
And the darker is the greater than 25, correct?
Yeah, there's layers here. There's layers that are going to show slope, and there's layers that are going to show
Show
hazardous
soils.
soil. Let me peel it away so you can see.
Yeah. Maybe
So you get
select
beam,
soils, yeah.
Let me maybe get away from the slope.
So we know what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. The soil type being QAFB. I think you can click on different portions and maybe see something different. Norwood being. Let's get this away. There we go. Norwood Tuff being another soil prominent on the property.
Norwood Tuft is there.
Right. And so the applicant in subdivision would go through a full geologic study.
Geological hazard study, yes.
Yeah.
But yes, and the slope was to show that. Okay, thank you. And just one more question. Since this is so far up in the WUI, I mean, I kind of measured from the corner of the property where their gate is into their property, first you come to, it goes a mile back, so it goes way up into the WUI. Was the fire department brought in? I know we don't do this at rezones, but
Not brought in for the rezone review. Applicable to the subdivision review.
right, okay.
So Jeremy, just to clarify, I understand we don't like split zoning, but was there ever a discussion about following more of the future land use map and putting 10-acre lots similar to where they are, or was that never part of the discussion?
But a solution to split zoning is they could do a bona fide division of agricultural land.
Following state statute, yes.
Yes, and create separate parcels so that you wouldn't have any split zoning for the RR10 and then the rest left in MU160.
Yes. future land use map would still be split.
Well, yes.
I can make a few comments to this. Looking at the majority of this property is surrounded by the natural resources. Everything up, you've mentioned several times the Deep Creek Ranches. The majority of the property sets up adjacent to those Deep Creek Ranches, which is all natural resource property. I'm pretty familiar with all this property through there. So for me, it's inconsistent zoning. To change this to an RR10 would be very inconsistent and seems out of line with the current development plan up through there. At this point, the oil road stops right at the very bottom section of it, much past there. The adjacent piece that is RR10 that you can see to the south of it is actually on the other side, down off of a hill to the dirt road. The road splits up, goes up through there, and it's adjacent. Some other issues, I know we've spoke to the safety concerns, which I can acknowledge. However, looking at our responsibility as a planning commission, I think this rezone would be inconsistent and not consistent with the general welfare of the area, and even go against the interest of the general welfare as far as where it is, where it's located, how the development would be planned. I know a comment was mentioned of, well, we may not be able to do that much anyway. There's been developments up other places in the general area of Milton area where it was, well, we're not going to do that many houses. So if you give me that lots, don't worry about it. However, we rezone it, it gives availability to those lots. So therefore, just to say that, well, we're not going to do that many, that doesn't hold any water to myself. So I have some concerns with that way. And everything, at least you talked about the different lots up in that natural resource area, those are undeveloped lots. Those are recreational lots. There's no property, there's no utilities in there. It's a dirt road in, they're camp lots. So much of this property does have a lot of different slopes to it. And fire hazards would definitely be a concern in that area. And for myself, I think with the inconsistencies of the surrounding properties, one small section, yes, goes into the future land use map of RR10. However, it's a very small section to it and doesn't seem consistent with any of the surrounding property of it. So that's my opinion. That's how I see it. And like I said, with going along with us as a planning commission representing the county, and then keeping in mind the general welfare, those are my concerns.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm the new kid here. I've been here all that long, but we talk about this linear action that occurs when we start with a rezone, and then even the short time I've been here, I haven't seen a whole lot of brakes put on once these things start. I normally default to the property owner's rights. That's where it starts. So I have great empathy with the Thurston family because they own their property and they have this situation and they want to see it resolved equitably for the family members. I'm a little disappointed in hearing about how the county has handled the road. It's an issue. In fact, it's such an issue, listening to what's been said today, that I think it impacts and affects general welfare. And so where I would normally default to the property owner's rights, I have a concern. If I were living on Deep Creek Road, my concern would be, as this continues down, then this, even though we would get a traffic study at some point, although I'm not sure who's responsible, who does a traffic study when ownership of the road is in question. My concern is that I can see a level of increase, potential increase in traffic, and keep in mind, my past career as a law enforcement officer, where I can see safety, where I can see EMS response, where I can see fire response. Already, I think it's restricted and limited. This amount of traffic that potentially would increase. And yes, we're dealing with a zoning issue, and it's sort of separate. We like to keep that separate from the follow-on stuff, but in this case, I don't think we can. I think the general welfare trumps those.
And I think to your point, based on our course tonight, I'll call it, there is a lot more gray area when it gets to the administrative process. So I understand your concern for, where that responsibility falls, especially if it's a subdivision, not a planned community. So I can empathize. Janet, maybe a dumb question, but can you clarify, does the county own this road?
I think we addressed this earlier, and maybe I'll have Garrett speak to it because he's more familiar with it. We've had meetings regarding this.
Such a hot topic tonight.
Yeah. I'm sorry, boss.
Hello. Yes, I have spoken with many of the people that live up Deep Creek Road. So within the statute, there is a maintenance provision. I know that Ty Eldridge was talking about getting an order from the Second District Court. That is something that can be pursued by either party. But after maintaining it for a period of 10 years, open and hostile, there's a number of elements. And so the county's position isn't necessarily that we own the road, but there is a public right-of-way. And we maintain that public right-of-way for safety purposes. We plow the road. And so the right-of-way exists even if ownership is not established. And so for that purpose, for the health, safety, and welfare of the community, we continue to maintain it and plow it so that it doesn't get worse than it already is. But it is an issue that has not been resolved. And the prior council had discussions. Now we have a new commission, and it's a point of re-educating and prioritizing. And I do hope that we can continue that dialogue. And in fact, I'm going to get a number of someone that I've lost contact with, because I was going to be taken up there to see some of what's going on at the end of the road and see what the county can do to limit the potential dangers. So I don't know if that clarifies anything, but that's the county's position at this point.
One question with that, which we maintain it, does it meet the standards of our typical county roadways?
It does not. And that's one of the issues is when, for example, like even Rollins Ranch, it's a newer development, but those do not meet the standards of the county either. But a lot of times the county's in a tough position because the people that live in developments and the road is not maintained, they come and they plead with the county to maintain it. And then the county is in that tough position of saying, we want to do what's best for our residents, but when we take this over, it's not up to county standards. And without owning, we have the right of way, and there's certain rights that we have with public rights of way 30 feet from the center line of the road. But when it can't be extended because maybe it does interfere with agriculture, drainage ditches, whatever it may be, it's not a simple fix. And I don't think, sometimes when I get these questions and I talk to you, I just say, well, can the county just give it back? But I don't know that that benefits everyone as well, and that everyone on Deep Creek wants that to happen. There's at least one I know that would probably want it based on discussions, but that doesn't mean that it's an easy decision. And so a lot of times as county officials, we inherit the problems of our antecedents, and I'm making problems for my predecessor, which I apologize for now. But we do the best that we can, and we hope that as we have dialogue with the community, that we can actually listen to that. And especially at a legislative position, there is discretion that the bodies have that they don't have on an administrative item.
Hey Garrett, I've got a quick question. So if I understand what you're saying, is there anything on file recorded in the recorder's office or anything of that nature that requires the county to maintain that road at this point?
It would just be the maintenance of the road for more than 10 years.
Okay,
It becomes a public right of way,
discretion.
and we cannot abandon it without going through a process as well. So that's why we're in this. Yeah, has ownership been established by a declaratory judgment with the Second District Court? No, we haven't gone through that process, but we can't just abandon when we have provided it's a health, safety, welfare thing where if we have gone up there with emergency vehicles, fire, EMS, things of that nature, and then we abandon it, we can't just choose that without going through a process with the state as well. So we're in a limbo position.
With that being said, I'd feel there's no way in good faith then to approve additional development up there, knowing that we don't have an approved roadway, and at this point it's a right-of-way through it, and almost more or less an agricultural access to the property in question.
It's a right. It is a county right-of-way.
The utilization of that road as far as accessing that property at this point is because there is no development, there is no infrastructure, it's more or less an agricultural right-of-way.
I wouldn't go that far, and the only reason I'm doing that is because
I understand where
in
your
agricultural,
stance, but-
like the scope of a prescriptive easement is private, and a public right-of-way is different, and so I'll just say it's more complicated than what you're saying, and
I'm just saying, looking at approving potential future development into something that there's not an approved roadway that meets county standards.
Yeah,
to say
it
that
does
we're
not
going to
meet
approve
county
additional
standards.
homes and access to those through a roadway that isn't seems irresponsible to me as well.
I feel like there's just more information that is needed at this point. There's a lot of questions that, like you're saying, from previous individuals that have not been answered and things that have not been taken care of that would need to be, at least to some extent, to protect multiple entities. There's just too many issues, too many questions.
And I would just push back to that to say, not for a rezone application, but you don't have to say yes because you have discretion. It may be that you need more information to push you to say yes.
That's fair.
But it doesn't mean that the application is not complete. And so I know I'm splitting hairs, but that's what attorneys do, just to make sure that we're not saying something that isn't legally sound.
So does that mean we would need to look at requiring some of these items for? Not for this, but like for future things, saying, "Hey, let's look at our code for future issues such as this. That we have to look at these prior to a rezone to make sure we're okay." Or are we going too far at that point?
If you're asking questions of the applicant that they do not legally have to answer, the applicant can speak to it, but you cannot require it at this stage because a rezone is very limited in the application itself. If aside from the rezone, like in your business discussion at the end, you as a planning commission could direct staff to do a text amendment, for example. So that is within your power under the code, but I wouldn't cross those lines because we have an applicant here that has a complete application, and you may just find as a body, I don't have enough information to say yes. And maybe that's what your recommendation is when it finally goes to the county commission. Something that could be helpful is if the county commission, I know sometimes they listen to these meetings to hear what your thoughts are. There will be a summary that goes into the planning commission packet that will end up in the county commission packet. And any conversations that you have with any of the county commission, you can send by email or just say, hey, these were my general thoughts. You could call them and say, the one that appointed you, for example, if you're not at large, maybe you have that relationship where you can just explain some of the concerns you had with the rezone itself. But I wouldn't muddy the application with all of these ancillary things. Just understand that those ancillary things may be a justification that you're not ready to say yes.
And I think we're confusing a couple of issues here, so I think we stand on the one issue. The one issue is, should we rezone this property, and that's it.
That's the only issue before you.
That's it.
That's been noticed to the public. And,
right.
And so
And then
I
as
don't
a-
want you to get in the weeds
Right.
of all the other things because that's
Well,
all
we're
before
not-
you tonight.
We're going to recommend, we're going to toss this to the county commission anyway, one way or the other. They get another discussion, they get another shot at it, they come there. We're just giving what we believe is, based on our authority, what our recommendation would be on this.
That's right. And the county commission, they are elected, so they're directly accountable to these people, whereas you're not because you're appointed by the county commission and you're directly responsible to the commission to look at the application and provide as many conditions or insights to help the commission make the best decision for the community as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Maybe as the county staff, the application is before us today because it's believed that it's complete and it's satisfied the requirements. But if we approve that and it continues to be approved at the next level, then there's a doubling down effect of the decision, right? The people can, in fact, buy lots, build on them, which is a doubling down effect of the road problem. Excuse me.
So I wouldn't confuse the two because they
Sure.
would still have to go through the administrative process after the fact. But if they can check all the boxes of what our code requires, then they have a vested right to make that development. And so I understand what you're saying is there's a doubling down, but it doesn't mean that they can just start selling lots because that cannot happen
Sure.
until there's a plat
I
recorded.
feel comfortable
after.
with it. I'm restating it just so the the community that's here today knows there's some checks and balances of steps.
Yes,
the
that's
steps
correct.
after the steps.
Yeah,
So
if it
just
doesn't meet
clarifying.
fire code, if it doesn't meet our subdivision code, if they can't check all those boxes that are required, then you can say no, even to an administrative. It's only in the administrative that you don't have discretion is if they check all the boxes of our code. But once again, we're at the legislative point, and you heard from Craig Call earlier, who's the first ombudsman in Utah, and he's very knowledgeable, talking about what guidance he gives you have wide discretion. And I know that there was something I wanted to clarify from one of our commissioners asking, can we just say no because we don't like it? And Craig said, yeah, but that's not why I would say no. I think that there's better ways to talk about health, safety, welfare, and to establish a reasonable basis rather than I just don't like it, or I live up Deep Creek and I don't want it there. I think that a better course of action to protect the county rather than just saying, I just don't like development or whatever the comment is, you say it doesn't fit in with the general plan as far as what is the future land use. It's only a portion, or there's a safety concern, or there's, other considerations that we're keeping in mind. Great questions, though. Any others?
I do have a question. Okay, the applicant has made a request to rezone 356 acres. Do we have discretion on changing that?
No, the
acreage?
applicant
So it's either
does.
up or down, yeah, but
Yeah.
us, it's up or down what's here.
If the applicant came in and said, I only want to rezone to what the future land use is, it does create that split zoning, which is not supported, or it just makes it more complicated on an enforcement with the zoning administrator, Josh, who's not here tonight, but we cannot change an application. That would be up to the applicant themselves. So at this point, we're past the public hearing portion, but this is not your last chance. So the county commission will hear it. They're the final decision-making body as well. And I'm sorry, the only reason that it's state law, and the only reason it exists is so that these don't go past midnight all the time. Because I'm sure we could discuss this all night if we wanted, back and forth.
To Garrett's point, and that will also be public noticed when it is at the county commission level. And if you ask Judy after, she can tell you how to sign up so you get notifications, or we can even pull it up if you would like to know when agenda items come forward.
Yeah, and I'll just say for those listening even later on, and you can always go back to this on YouTube, if you go to the Utah Public Notice website and you sign up specifically for the Morgan County Commission, then you'll receive an email of every agenda as it's posted. Under our code, we don't have to do another 10-day notice for a public hearing because you only have to notice the first public hearing with those requirements. And so you will want to be updated on the Utah Public Notice website. That's the best way.
Sorry, I should have clarified. I meant the agenda in advance on our website, but yes.
Oh, yeah, and that's also on the Morgan County website as well. But the public notice will actually send you an email where our website doesn't do that as of yet.
Any more discussion, team?
If I were going to say anything, I'd just say I thought Debbie brought up a couple of really good points there. This is not the only way to get what they need or want.
And if we're going against the recommendation, we need to come up with our own findings.
Madam Chair, I move we forward a negative recommendation to the County Commissioner for Thurston rezone application 25.018, changing 356.55 acres from multiple use M160 to rural residential RR10, and reflect that the change on the future land use map from a split designation of natural resources and recreation and ranch residential 10 to ranch residential 10 completely due to the following findings: inconsistent with the future land use map, inconsistent or not within the reasonable agreements with general welfare, health and safety, or with the general interest of the community.
Inadequacy of the road.
Yeah. Inadequacy of the road and just unknown compliance of the road itself.
I second the motion.
A motion by Member McMillan, a second by Member Watt. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Any business or staff questions tonight?
Leaving us.
I kind of have a question for staff, but I don't know, and maybe for our attorney here, to add more of the request for ordinance change. I mean, I don't know, because we've talked about split zone, and we talked about it before, tightening up the code to address split zones.
Okay. And so you want an ordinance rewrite?
To address split zone, because it comes up all the time.
I know we had a county commission meeting where they went over.
I know, I witnessed it, so I don't know if they want to add anything more, or just wait, or what.
Well, and you guys can certainly direct staff, tonight to do so.
Can we
I think
request
it would
that
be better if
people
you
step
had.
out?
It's still open.
Like if they're having conversations out there, to step outside so we can continue our meeting.
I just didn't know if staff wanted to be directed since their plate's kind of full.
Well, there is. I think what would be more helpful is if you guys came up with some ideas and some guidelines. I think it gets really difficult amending these ordinances not knowing where you guys really want them to be. So like with the short-term rental, I made like a 50-page short-term rental because giving options. And so just knowing some of kind of what you want accomplished with that ordinance, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to put it on the plate. It might just be unrealistic that it'll get done in the next month. But certainly if you give us something and something to work with.
Remove or from every ordinance.
Because I think you have a ton of experience with this. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you could work. Don't want to put more on your plate either, but
And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll pull up samples for Josh and I'll try and get kind of an outline for him to just give him something to start with. Because sometimes I think that if you have something to work with, it's a little bit easier. So,
May I ask, do we have an ordinance on ADUs?
yes.
We do. We talked about it. I think you were absent.
I
There was a
probably
discussion
gone.
about it
Yeah,
recently
I was
in a
messing,
meeting.
Screwing off somewhere.
We do. Yes,
You
we
sent
can.
that to me.
It's extensive and it's in the code.
Yeah, it's a
That's
good size section.
over in my neck of the woods. That's coming up all
Yeah,
the time. People
it's
talk
coming up a
about
lot due to the state
all the time.
adjustments.
Yeah.
Call the planning office and we're happy to go through that with you.
It just feels like with that whole conversation that roadway not truly having good, solid, concrete understanding of ownership and whose liability
Well,
there
we
is
do. The county does have a right of way because we've been maintaining it. Now the extent of that.
Forever.
Well, the
yeah,
con-
and
the
I do.
concern is
Same understanding what it is now. It's never been clarified. It's been that way.
The
Yeah.
concern is, to me, is considering a right of way a roadway. They're
Yes.
they're two different things.
Well, yes and,
And-
no.
and when you start
No,
talking- Yeah.
it's prescriptive. I mean,
And a
it's
prescriptive
ours.
easement is a legitimate easement. It absolutely is.
Yes.
And it just has to be there for a long period of time, which 10 years, I mean, is it 20? 20 is actually.
I think, yeah.
When you-
I think
when
it's
you
20.
say-
but
when you-
we can't just give it up.
Right.
No.
Now,
I
or else
agree.
we have
Buses use
liability
it.
there.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree,
yeah.
but when you use the term roadway, you're inferring engineering and grading and drainage and
And a survey.
not just clearing the snow off some asphalt we threw
Yeah,
down.
totally.
And that's what it's.
So I guess what's the next step? What can legal do? What can engineering do? What needs to be done to be able to clear that up? Because I see that as a potential issue for the applicant tonight.
And for a lot of people that live up there. And I think that's something that needs to be discussed, with the commission. Is that something where they want to go in and do eminent domain?
Right.
And
Totally.
take the whole roadway. And then you got to think, how much is that going to cost us?
Yeah, it's expensive.
I would be using this same discussion anytime someone came to me about something on Deep Creek. This would inform everything that we're thinking of. So I almost think there's an incumbency upon the county to resolve this issue.
And it's also something that could be dealt with. We do it a lot with a lot of development agreements where we don't want to maintain the roads and we make them build their own private roads up to county standards.
I think to
Yeah.
Debbie's point, though, there wouldn't be a development agreement if they go through the subdivision process versus like if they had asked for a reason to plant community, that would be a part of the discussion, right?
Right.
So the motion to the county commission could fail, and they can't bring the same request back within 2 years. That's
Yeah,
what.
exactly.
But they could.
They could have
They
planned.
could pick a different zone and fill out a new application, it complete coming before the body.
Because I think that's where it's hard, right? There's no development agreement at this zone.
And I also feel bad that they are trying to figure things out
with their
amongst their family. That's rough. I think most of us have dealt with that to some extent, or will in the future, or have heard about people in that situation. But just rezoning to sell a bunch of lots with so many issues up in the air, I think opens the county up.
Well, and Garrett had pointed out, our code does kind of address the dead end roads and WUI. I think it's 155, 427. So that would have to be sorted out before they had their subdivision. So, I mean, and that is kind of the nice thing, even though I complain about a code all the time. A lot of times there's something in there that kind of addresses all these things that we're really concerned about before we even get to it.
I wouldn't even, if I were a developer, I wouldn't be interested in this land until we resolve this process for them. How are you going to, you understand what I'm saying? How would you come up with a cost benefit analysis and we're still having this same discussion? So I do think there's, as I said, there's some incumbency. I don't know how to do it, but I think there's some incumbency on the county
And I don't think the
resolve
applicant
this.
intended to develop, and so they're not thinking like a developer. They're just saying, if I can get it to RR10, I can probably sell it to a
sell it.
developer easier. And
Which I
so-
know that it wouldn't fall upon them, but I mean, conform to standards there were.
Then
so
it'd be
far-
on the developer who's going to buy
That's what I'm saying, but
this.
we're so far out from even getting to the actual development of conform to standards to even access it is
Well, even if they're self-developing,
That's an issue here.
One
And all
thing-
that, all that Deep Creek was developed 50 years ago. When this came in, all those lots up through there, up into Deep Creek Ranches. When Stevenson did all that, it was a dirt road in. He sold lots off. Some houses that trickled in.
Yeah.
Yes,
illegal
it was
lots.
illegal at the time as well. All those 10-acre lots up in there.
I would just keep in mind though, when applications come through for lots that predated 1980, they are grandfathered in, and so we can't have the same discussion about, okay, you don't meet our code because they are legally developable, and it's different. Like if there was a rezone approved or recommended for approval and the county commission ultimately approved it, then now we can hold to different standards, or at least the current standards. There is some grandfathering that occurs, and that's up to the discretion of the zoning administrator.
I was going to say, who picked 1980? It used to be when code was enacted in 63 or whatever.
53.
63, yeah.
53 is when they did the state code, and then I don't know when the county
County was 63, I
they
believe.
did 63.
With the Highlands, yeah.
So I'm just saying because I talked to Josh who interprets the code, and he says, I've gone back to say this is about where I look at to see what pre-existed that based on our code, and that may be a conversation to have with Josh because once again he's only been here less than me, and so once again it's nice to have the institutional knowledge to pass on.
Well, I think 63 makes sense if that was code like grandfather.
That's
right?
when Morgan County.
That's like a leg to stand on because 19 it maybe has a reason, but that seems like a
I think in looking back in old ordinances, I think it was 1980 where we really adopted
like a
kind of the
subdivision
land
ordinance.
use. Yeah.
A subdivision ordinance.
Subdivision ordinance and,
And
stuff
got a
was
land use
around
map.
1980.
Is that
No, it was before.
Before?
It was before that because it was Frankie Bone. It was
But there's lots
long
all over
before
town.
that.
So there are questions that can be addressed, and
It was in the 60s.
and anyway, I just wouldn't get too gung ho at a meeting to hang a hat on something if there is some grandfathering going on. Just if you have a question about it, chat with Janet, Josh, me, someone before the meeting, so we don't say something that could make us legally in trouble on the back end, which Janet loves doing it, but I don't.
I do.
So our resources could be to amending our code or other things of that nature as well. But I appreciate the discussion tonight. I think it was, really,
awesome.
really great.
So if we continue this discussion, sorry to belabor this, but we continue discussion about wanting to talk to staff about ordinance and things, is this something we should be agendaing discussions about and then coming back with ideas? Are there such a thing as
work
closed
sessions?
for planning committees and?
I can
So if
speak to
there's-
that. If
Like a
you were to
work session.
formalize a request tonight to staff on what text to develop, then staff in the past has organized work sessions, which are meetings prior to the regularly scheduled times. And in a more open forum, perhaps around this desk, we can have those conversations.
Okay.
I would also suggest reaching out to the county commission because they're the ones that are responsible to the taxpayer. And if you're thinking, okay, is there an eminent domain? What is that going to cost? Because I think that's why prior councils have not moved forward, because they're like, oh yeah, let's resolve this. And then they look at the cost and like, let's not resolve this.
And
exactly
eminent
right.
domain is not popular.
It's not,
And it
it's
is
not
a very
cheap. I mean, it's yeah.
No, it's not cheap, and it's not a popular thing to do.
It's gonna look bad.
It's one of the, I love the entire Fifth Amendment except eminent domain.
Yeah.
And I still don't know why. I mean, I understand why the founders did it, but I would still debate and disagree with them on having that as part of our Constitution, personally.
Where does the decision tonight leave the applicant and the actual county commission?
So the county commission, if they rely upon your recommendation, I'm sure they'll hear public comment. There will be a public hearing. They'll take more feedback, and based upon your recommendation and the issues that they're already somewhat aware of, they still have the ability to approve the rezone as well. But if you have a strong recommendation that's based upon, oh, what did Craig put up on the screen? Not a scintilla or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
the
More than a scintilla.
like more than a scintilla. We're gonna, we have articulable facts. I know it's not that, but there's something that's based upon more than I feel like it's facts that we can cite to. Then that helps the commission a lot. And so I think the way you discussed it, the way that the motion was phrased, it at least provides help to the commission that way. If the applicant decided to readjust their application and say, you know what, because the future land use, or maybe we'll just divide it into 2 parcels and this one will be rezoned, then they, rather than having their application denied and they have to wait to bring another application, they could amend their application, but it would come back to you before, because it's substantial enough of a change that at least we would have that discussion with Josh to say, we recommend that you bring it back here because it's a material change in the application that should be given to the Planning Commission to form that recommendation to have that discussion again. That can be done even before it goes to the planning or to the county commission.
When is that? Do we know?
It won't go to the next meeting because we need
approximately 2 weeks.
So I would say September
That first
2nd.
third,
Yeah.
Second. So I've got court on the
Tuesday.
3rd, so I know it's, yeah.
Because the
After
first is
Labor
Labor
Day.
Day. Yeah.
Yep. So it'd be September 2nd is the soonest it would go. Yeah.
I'm curious, just being new, in terms of process, I'm not familiar with just how it goes. And so I'm assuming because the application process came to us, right, that our staff, believed that it was prudent according to whatever is needed in the application process for it to come here. So we saw it. We did not view that it was prudent at this time for all the reasons. What should be addressed, in terms of just process that would empower the staff to say, these are the reasons why we wouldn't, in the application process, bring it here first. And maybe I'm not even asking that properly, but
I think part
curious.
of it is the split zoning, but
The application is very simple. It's an application form filled out, it's a fee paid, and a description of the property. And so the scope of our review is also extremely limited, where we look at surrounding properties, look at zoning, look at future land use map, look at the land use table, not that we can read the applicant's mind, but we can kind of see maybe if they're looking for a certain land use designation that's not present in the current zoning, that could be used as an argument.
But
That's the extent of our scope.
Legislative's different.
Right.
An applicant
Is that
does
what you were asking?
legislative, it has to come forward administrative. If it doesn't meet code, it's not complete.
Was your question about legislative?
No, it's more about code. Just,
Be separate.
I'm just wondering, if we felt pretty clear the roads are not safe, why isn't that part of the application process?
because
before it
legally
comes here?
they don't look at that.
I think is what was
Or a
Debbie's
rezone.
point.
Subdivision, yes.
So that's not in our code for ordinances. We don't have to.
So
look
is
at
that
roads
your
at this-
question then, just about ordinances? Should we be proactively looking at this stuff so that it's addressed in the application process before coming here?
Well, a rezone is just a request to have different entitlements to your property, and so it's not looking at the details of what that looks like. It's just a request that comes forward, and generally you're limited in scope to say, well, what does the general plan say? What does the future land use say? What does our code say about the split zoning, and why is that disfavored? Well, a lot of times, as Craig Call was saying tonight, if there's ambiguity, it's drawn in favor of the applicant, and so maybe someone who would be limited on what they could do in an RR1, but also has A20, now can do A20 things in RR1 because we interpret it in favor of the applicant. And so those are some of the things that I think went through planning's mind as they're looking at it. But the benefit of having the community, and Member McMillan specifically had some personal knowledge of the area, and that's probably from growing up here or being up that road a lot, or maybe having friends that they tromped over those hills or whatever it may be, and he knows slopes and soils and things like that. That's not something that the zoning administrator or planning staff will know as much, because our zoning administrator lives outside of Morgan, hasn't grown up here, doesn't. And that's not what they're looking at for zoning. And that's why we say we don't ask those questions. Or if you throw it out, Janet or I will say, hey, applicant, you're not legally required to answer that question, but if you think it would help the planning commission in making their decision, then feel free to address whatever you want.
And I always ask those questions.
You do.
Yeah.
And that's
And
why
I'm trying to get better.
And that's why we say, applicant, you don't have to answer.
Yep. And that's
Yeah, and is your mic on? Member Watt, is your mic on?
We bring in the extra information.
That's right.
And review it. It starts there, but we're in this evaluative process of considering outside factors that may not be on the form.
And that's part of why we're doing the training with Craig and kind of talking about the processes too, because there's been questions, well, are we just a rubber stamp to whatever staff says? No, you bring value and insight from the community that staff may not have, or they might not have considered. And so that's why you're spread throughout the county. We have 5 areas, 2 at large, but you're spread throughout the county to bring some of those concerns that you hear, your knowledge of the area, to be part of that discussion.
And that's very valuable. It was very valuable because several times during our discussion, I went and looked at 3 or 4 slides that he had put up to see.
Right.
The training was awesome.
Yeah, that training was very timely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm
Coordinating.
going to ask, well, and Janet too, but I'm going to ask if he'll maybe come back twice a year and just so we're compliant with all your training, because you have to have 4 hours. 3 is about land use specifically, and 1 anyway, I know that the county attorneys can do training as well, so we do the Open Meetings Act, but that would at least check the box if you go and get other training. But the fact that he's coming to do it for free, he's coming to us, you can ask questions, it's not the big,
It was really relevant too. His
Yeah.
examples were great.
Yep.
So if you guys want to come up with questions to forward to us that we can maybe forward on to Craig for the next training,
Yes.
to
that
come
would
up with
be-
some topics, that would be great.
I'd like to read
Just
the
so
book
you're
first.
aware, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, Craig Call is either speaking at or present at the Utah Land Use Institute conferences. He'll also show up at the APA conferences. I've seen him. And so he's there, and that's a good chance to hear from him in a larger form.
And he is our appeal authority.
Right, and so we'll learn a lot. If people do appeal, it goes to the appeal authority. That will help the county in our analysis to see, are we being too, I don't want to say, property owner friendly or public friendly or whatever it is, because I don't want to just draw lines, but typically that's how it is. As a property owner comes in, and that same property owner may speak against their neighbor developing their, it's just the nature of property ownership. And so Craig can give us that guidance, and I know prior appeal authorities, sometimes the county disagrees with their analysis, and then it went to the district court rather than saying, okay, maybe, we didn't analyze everything. So.
Question quick on the appeal authority. He said they don't hold public hearings, but is it considered a public meeting? Can the public come in or not? Is it a public meeting?
Well, it is recorded, and I'm not sure how we notice that.
It's not noticed now.
Yeah, I don't think it's noticed, but I'm not sure if it's a public meeting or not.
I was going to ask him.
It's an administrative appeal, and
I think it would be an open meeting, but it's not a public hearing where other people get to give input.
That's what I mean, but it would be open.
I think it's open to the public.
But then shouldn't
it
be
would
noticed?
have to
And
be.
then it should be noticed probably.
I
Just
think
out of
it's. I think
curiosity.
in the new
Is it in our?
I think it is in the appeal, the
Because we just
155.030.
updated our.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe at
updated
least
our
goes on the
code
state
to-
public
And
notice
remember, we added the 45 days into it.
Yes.
For me. Yeah.
Yeah. So we haven't applied our new code yet, but we've updated it. So.
That's where we talked about on the subdivision. After his decision, it would still come back before the county commission.
Correct.
But that was the only
That was.
instance.
Yeah.
And they'll take what we talked about into account, it sounds like.
Yeah.
They'll
Well-
look at our recommendation, not our
about it.
findings, and then
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be part of the record,
how much water it
but
holds.
it is important to state your findings and conclusions on the record. Even though you've had discussions, you want to state it on the record, so it's very clear for the applicant as well on what they're appealing.
Good meeting.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Approval of, do you pull up our agenda again?
Approve the minutes,
Approval
right?
of the minutes, yep. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from July 17th?
So moved.
Motion by member Sessions,
Second.
second by member Watt. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Member Watt, member King, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?